like to welcome you to the Board of Behavioral Sciences meeting today on May 10th, 2019. We're meeting at the Mission Inn in Riverside, and we're going to go ahead and open the meeting. So we'll call for a quorum, please.
Good morning. Gabriel Lamb.
Here.
Alexander Kim.
Here.
Dr. Christine Witless Bach.
Here.
Max Disposti.
Here.
Betty Conley.
Here.
Dr. Peter Chu.
Here.
Jonathan Maddox.
Here.
Christina Wong.
Here.
Dr. Leah Brew.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. So I'd like everyone to introduce themselves. We'll start over here with Steve.
Hi, Steve Sodergren, Assistant Executive Officer of the Board.
Can I go? Wow. Roseanne Helms, Legislative Analyst for the Board.
Gabriel Lamb, LCSW member.
Alexander Kim, Public Member.
Christine Witless-Bach, Public Member.
Max Disposti, Public Member.
Sabina Knight, Legal Counsel.
Betty Conley, LEP member.
Kim Manson, Executive Officer.
Peter Chu, Public Member.
Jonathan Maddox, MFT Member.
Christina Wong, LCSW Member.
Leah Brew, LPCC Member.
I have it. Do you want me to get it? Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Would any members of the public like to introduce themselves? Welcome to do so.
Janley Wong, National Association of Social Workers.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers.
Dr. Wendell Callahan, University of San Diego, longtime licensed educational psychologist.
Oh.
Good morning, Kathy Atkins, Deputy Executive Director of the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Good morning, Brad Muldrow, Staff Attorney, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Oh, welcome.
Jerry Grossman Seminars.
And Luke Martin with the California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Welcome, everyone. Sir, who did you say you were with? I'm sorry, you in the blue shirt?
Just can't.
Oh, Brad Muldrow, Staff Attorney, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists.
Oh,
Welcome.
Thank you. Welcome. A new
So
face.
smart. Yes.
So we're going to move to the Department of Consumer Affairs update.
Okay.
So Kim, can you take us
Yeah.
through that?
I'd be happy to do that. So the department provided us a summary of their activities in the last quarter and what's going on at Consumer Affairs. That's in your packet. Some highlights. You may be aware or may not be aware, but Director Dean Graffilio has accepted another position and has departed his post as the DCA director. So currently we have no assigned director, but the rest of Dean's team is there, and we're working with him. Our interaction and our work with him has not changed. So we wish Dean well in his new endeavors. And they wanted me to announce that we will be having another quarterly meeting with the executive officers and the bureau chiefs on June 3rd, 2019. Just as a follow-up to the executive officer salary study, the department retained KH Consulting to conduct the survey and the study. And initially, the project was anticipated to end on March 2019, but there's been some delay because some of the information that they're seeking has not been provided yet. They were hoping to have that all together and be able to provide the results of the study at the end of April. In speaking with the department, it looks like the delay may be just a few more weeks, but we will be getting something. DCA now has an open data portal. I'm going to defer to Steve to talk about this.
Yeah, that's excellent. I would recommend everyone check that out on DCA. If you go on their website, I believe it's called, there's a data, it's got a little world sign, I believe, the insignia, And this will give you access to all the statistical reports for the last few fiscal years. I think it's the 2 or 3 fiscal years for all boards, and you can kind of cruise through there and filter through all the data, looking at application volumes and licensing population and such. The other thing that's kind of cool about that is they actually, we get a lot of requests for addresses of therapists in certain areas, and you can actually go in there and download lists that will give everything that is currently public information, which is the address and names. So you can do that too. So before, we would have to direct everyone to DCA, and they would have to go through the process of, I don't know if it was a very arduous process, but still the process. So now we can direct them to the website there. So a couple of things we're working on, though. We did notice that some of the statistics, there's 1 or 2 small points of data that we needed to correct. So we're working with them on that. But yeah, I would recommend checking it out. It's very cool.
And then finally, DCA wanted me to note that the conclusion of their Future Leadership Development Program is ending this next month. And it's the second time that they have done this program. And essentially what this is it's DCA employees can apply to participate in this program. And it's a rigorous program. They do a lot of training. The individuals are assigned a project to complete. They present the project at their graduation. But it's the intent of this program is to develop the new leaders after those of us that have been around a while actually hang up our hat and move on into the sunset. So that's the intent. And it really is a good experience. I've had the privilege of serving on that with that program as a mentor for 2 years, and it's interesting to see the growth from when they start the program to the end of the program. So that's DCA's update.
Thank you, Kim. So I'd like to move on to a very important item. Dr. Christine Witless Bach is going to be leaving the board. She's terming out, and to our great loss. So I would like to read the resolution that I have in my hands here. Whereas Dr. Christine Witless Bach faithfully served as a member of the California State Board of Behavioral Sciences from February 7th, 2010 to June 30th, 2019. And whereas Dr. Witless Bach faithfully served as board chair from June 2011 to May 2014. And whereas Dr. Witless Bach served as a member of Policy and Advocacy Committee and a member of the Licensing and Examination Committee. And whereas throughout her years of service, she gave fully of herself and her ideas and acted forthrightly and conscientiously, always with the public interest and welfare in mind. And whereas she discharged these important responsibilities in a manner reflecting great credit upon herself and the board, and whereas her colleagues wish to express to her their high esteem and regard, now therefore be it resolved this 10th day of May 2019 that the members of the California State Board of Behavioral Science express heartfelt appreciation to Dr. Christine Witless Bach for the outstanding contribution she made during her term of service to the board.
We should do so a lot.
And I will really miss you. I can't get out. Nope. I'm apparently trapped. Thank you so much. Should I run in front? Thank you. You guys, I'm going to let me go right back. Yes. Quick picture. Sure. Can we do that there? You want to do it over here? Yeah.
So everybody can see that. Sorry, we're trying to cover it.
Yeah, up there. Did you say on the piano? So
I just want to say how honored I've been to serve on this board and how interesting it's been to learn about the different professions that are regulated by this board. And I've grown so much as a person. I've met some great friends, and I just really thank you to everyone on the board and everyone else for being so welcoming and helpful, especially when I served as chair. And people were just quite helpful with that. So I will miss you, but I will be around. So, yes.
Yes.
Sure.
Sure.
Doesn't have to be a break.
Yeah. Yeah. All right.
Go ahead anyway.
Okay, we're going to defer the meeting minutes.
Do you want to hold off on the photo then? We're going to hold off. Okay. So we are going to defer the next item, which is the consent calendar and approval of the February 28th, March 1st board meeting minutes to the next meeting. And I forgot to do that before this item, which I was just so excited about, Christine, that I just skipped an item. So now we're going to move on to the executive officer report. Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. All righty. Good morning. So our budget for this year has grown just a little bit. It's $12,547,000. The increase is reflective of an augmentation for our Attorney General services and enforcement operations, and so that's the reason for the increase. And attached is the expenditure log that we provide every meeting. Based on the information that we have thus far, it looks like we're at 64% and have spent just a little over $8 million. At our last meeting, I reported that DCA Fiscal Office indicated that the fiscal operations and year-end reporting for last fiscal year would be done in March. Recently, DCA Fiscal Office notified us that as a result of some additional reconciliation requirements, that year-end close is being delayed, and they hope it will be concluded after June 2019. And again, the memo is in your packet for your review. And again, we're not the only state agency affected by the delays in receiving our timely reports from Fiscal. It's just very similar to some of the operating bumps we had when we first went on to Breeze, but we're assured that eventually these will get worked out. I will say on a personal note, it makes managing a budget kind of interesting. So you hoping your check doesn't bounce? But anyway, our historically, we don't vary that much in our expenditures, so and I'm feeling pretty confident. Our budget also this year, you'll see in the expenditure and the fund condition, you'll see that the last of our $12.3 million loan will be paid this year. So that's helpful. And our condition right now as it stands is a 4.5 month in reserve. So that's not too bad. Are there any questions about the budget?
So, with the expenses, only up to 64%, do you anticipate, that you have surplus or?
Right now we're estimating, our best estimate, if you look at the budget sheet at the bottom, it looks like about $70,000. We don't have access to all of the expenditures because they're through Fiscal. And it's a lot of stuff that used to come to us in a different report under the old accounting system. So what you see in our expenditure log is bills that come in directly to us and information I can get out of the budget office thus far. So it's nice estimates. So that's the best we can do at this point, which makes me nervous. I feel like I'm flying blind, but eventually it'll get worked out. All righty. Moving forward, we have our board statistics for you for the third quarter. You'll note that in the licensing program we had an 18% increase. And in addition to that, our processing times increased on all our applications. And primarily this is due to staff vacancies, and I have a couple of positions opened in the licensing unit and some training that's going on. And I would expect that the next quarter, the next report, you're going to see a huge, significant jump in application volumes because graduations are happening this month and next. And our processing times, I'm hoping, will not rise any further than they are right now, but we'll see. We issued just a little over 1,400 new licenses in the third quarter, and as of April 9th, we have 115,753 licensees and registrants. So that's, we're growing. And the examination program, we administered 3,873 examinations, and also included in the packet is the pass rates for the total number of people taking the exam, as well as first-time takers. And in addition, we also have our school pass rate statistics for you. We conducted 10 examination development workshops to develop our law and ethics exams for all the professions and the LEP exam, as well as the LMFT clinical exam. OPES is still working on our LMFT occupational analysis, and this is my plug to all LMFTs to participate in the survey that will be available around August. We can only develop the exam based on the information that's provided to us. The more information we get about practice settings, trends in the field, the more robust and relevant our exam can be. The way we're going to distribute the survey is two methods. If you have an email address on file with us, it'll go out to your email address. We'll have a link on the website, our website as well, and I intend to share it with camp so that they can push it out to their members as well. If you'd like your email address on file with us, certainly give that to us by July 1st. We'd really appreciate that. In our administration program, we received nearly 8,200 applications last quarter, and the chart in this packet reflects the number of people that are now using the online renewal system. 96% of the individuals renewing are using that system, and it's a much quicker process to renew. It ensures the renew process is complete, and as soon as they log out, they can go back into the website and see that they have a new expiration date. So that's been really beneficial. We've had a couple of bumps. We've probably given a couple of people the hard paper copy, but by and large, everybody's pretty much using the online renewal system. Yes.
Can I interject something too? Not interject, but add on to that with the online renewal. Just really quick too. I don't know if we had it in here, but we did. We put on the law and ethics exams online too. When renewing or when doing anything with your license, we're going to start getting the word out there. Use manage your license in Breeze, not start application, because that is causing some confusion.
Oh,
so,
okay.
There you go.
No. And then our enforcement program, the work continues to be relatively consistent. We received 391 consumer complaints last quarter and 252 criminal conviction reports. We closed a total of 550 cases. We sent 28 cases over to the Attorney General's office for formal discipline. And as of March 31st, the Attorney General's office had 442 cases pending. We filed a total of 28 accusations and 12 statement of issues and issued 32 citations. We also adopted 19 decisions, so board members, if you thought you were getting more to read, here's your proof. The average number of days for our board to complete the formal discipline process averaged 528 days. The numbers in this particular paragraph were swapped some, but I think the packet reflected 370 days, but it's actually 528 days. And the year-to-date average is 513 days. This metric is determined from the time that the complaint enters the board office, and we start working on it to the date the formal discipline action is completed. And the performance measure for this particular metric is 540 days. So we're now finally getting under and meeting that benchmark. We also began measuring the time that the cases are with the Attorney General, so from the time we refer it to the time it comes back and it's finalized. Last quarter it was 370 days, so just a little over a year. And our year-to-date average is 345 days. So I'm excited that it seems like having the two probation, or what I call NAG-the-DAG analysts, working directly with the AG's office is starting to pay off, as well as some of the additional hires that have been made in that office. Yes.
Yeah. Realistically speaking, how much more improvement do you think we can make in terms of number of days?
Well, that would be interesting, because part of this metric depends on resources at the Office of Administrative Hearing as well as the Deputy Attorney General's office. I think we're starting to see the benefit of having additional staff in both of those offices. Hopefully we can see more reduction in the numbers, but I wouldn't even be able to venture a guess. So the average number to complete all board investigations, everything we get is 194 days. Our year-to-date average is 131, and I believe the benchmark is 180. We did not conduct any CE audits last quarter due to operational needs, and staff attended or participated in 11 outreach events. The most recent one was the CAMPed annual conference, and I had the honor of speaking to the membership there. And we had 2 staff members at a table for the entire conference, and their participation and presence was well received. So these are really good. We should be doing this. That way the board is present, we're transparent, and you can actually ask your questions and get them answered from the source. So very grateful that we've been able to do that the last several years. And finally, our move, we're done. We are so done. Oh, can I say this was the ugliest move ever? You know that move you have, you're just moving just a couple houses down the street, and you think it's going to be super easy? That was this move, and it was not easy. But we're there. I am forever grateful to Steve and other staff members who really went above and beyond. Steve became known as our tool man, Sodergren. You needed it moved, fixed, or put in, Steve was doing it. Off hours, of course, and never on state time. So that being said, we had, I believe, about roughly $450,000, $445,000 saved for the move. We spent every dime but $65. So, but we have a beautiful new suite. We have extra space for growth, and we have our own little conference room. We have a lovely break room that is probably 4 times the size of what we had, and we held our first potluck in there, and I can't tell you how it warms my heart to see staff going in, having a meal together, interacting, chatting, and just kind of relaxing, and so yeah, it's quite an experience. I never want to do it again. So.
Well, and I want to thank you for all the work that you did, also off hours, and of course not on state time, but I do believe some weekends were spent moving files and organizing. And anyway, it looks very nice, and thank you for all your hard work as well, Kim.
Thank you.
Kim, I just want to have a quick feedback. So in regards of the outreach activities, so thanks Steve and Darlene, being there at Chico State. And I just want to tell the board that it's so well received. And it's so important for the students, even for the faculty, because they're not really up to date. And so when we have people on campus to answer all the questions, to talk about the trend, explain to the board, explain to the students and the faculty, what the board's functions really are. I think it cleared a lot of these misunderstandings and misconceptions, about what we do. So I just want to reiterate how important that outreach activities are.
Yeah, actually, I like doing it. I just think it's a nice way to bridge reality and eliminate misperceptions. And I enjoy seeing, the attendees at those events, and the licensees and the registrants and the pre-registrants, and it's I don't know. I just think it's part of what we need to be doing. So, ready? Any other questions? Alrighty, we'll move to the personnel update. And due to Mr. Sodergren's hard work and labor, we promoted him to a different level of classification to serve as an assistant executive officer. This classification is more appropriate and more reflective of the work that Steve does. And so I'd like to congratulate him on being a successful candidate. Yes. It does not come with an orange hammer. I'm sorry.
I bet I could get you a little orange apron though.
Yeah.
You know where they have those.
So we've had a couple of departures. Our halftime LCSW evaluator, Tanya Bourdet, left for promotion. And as I mentioned last board meeting, our licensing manager, Paula Gershon, is retiring. I know. So I'm for temporarily managing the licensing unit. So, yeah, if you have a problem, you can call me or not. But currently we have 7 vacancies at the board. Steve and I are sitting down and we're reevaluating each and every position. We're trying to realign things correctly. And we've held off on filling many of the vacancies primarily because of the budget and the uncertainty, because I knew we were cutting it kind of close. So we wanted to err on the side of caution. But effective July 1, recruitment efforts are going to begin in earnest, and we're going to get those positions filled. So we currently have a manager position available, actually 2 of them, a part-time position in enforcement and a full-time position in enforcement, as well as a part-time position in licensing and a cashiering position and another analyst position in the criminal conviction unit. So we'll get those done yesterday after July 1. So are there any questions about personnel? Okay. I'm going to just reference the strategic plan, and you'll note that some of the new activities are there. We've updated it. Roseanne will talk about it a little bit later in our legislative update, but one of our big goals is the license portability bill. That is moving forward, and I'm going to share with you that the national organizations are watching it. They're very excited about this bill, and we are as well, and it's being well received. And I've also had a number of states contact me about the format and how we arrived at what we were doing. So that's exciting.
I have 2 questions about the strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
So one of on 2.3, page 52, improve the board's examination study materials to increase access to exam preparation. Let's see, is that the one? Yeah. So where are we with that? And concerns relating to no. Yeah, I think it's 2.3.
Yeah. We've met with OPS and they're on board, but nothing's been moved forward. And my suspicion is that we'll wait until after the new exam vendor comes online.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other question I had was any update on hiring an in-house counsel?
No. The update would be to tell you that we've submitted a budget change proposal for that. Previous efforts by other boards have not been successful, even though they have the statutory authority to do so. So what I plan to do is I'm going to raise it in our sunset this summer as, an issue, something that we'd like to see.
Yeah,
and we shall
helpful.
See.
Yeah.
Yes, it would be.
Because it's so, they know the laws, but we have to train them in our way of thinking. And so it's been so nice that we've had Sabina consistently for a bit now. All right, thank you so much.
So no, it's still there. It's on the to-do list.
Yes.
Timing is everything.
Yes. All right, good to know.
Yes. Peter?
Yeah, could you explain the status item 6.3 a little bit more? Initiate plan with assigned PIO to develop an instructional video.
6.3? Oh, okay. So Steve and I have been meeting with public affairs to develop a stronger presence on social media, as well as develop some video tutorials. Now that we have an actual liaison in the public affairs office, we can see we're going to be able to make some headway on that. So, Steve, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, and we've been meeting with her consistently. And the last meeting we had, the 6.3, I don't have it pulled up here, but I think it was one of the first few videos that we are working on are going to kind of address supervision requirements to explain to associates what to do as an associate. And we're looking at doing 3 types of videos: how to become an associate, supervision during your not internship, associateship, I guess, and how to look at those hours afterwards. So those are the 3 videos that we're kind of concentrating on right now.
So it's not really about outreaching to the general public.
Well, part of that's with the video presentation. We are also, she has developed for us a social media plan and an outreach type of plan. So we are looking at other ways to use Facebook and social media to get to the wider audience. Even talking about, I know one time it was brought up of how do you get like high school students interested in social work or becoming a therapist. And so we're looking at ways to kind of make more of a presence and get a greater audience in regards to what we do here at the board and what therapists do. And one of the videos that we are also going to work on is we're planning for our anniversary coming up next year. We want to have a video explaining what is a therapist and also why the board exists. So hopefully those will be good, where the general public might actually come to our website to see, some general information. And so that's kind of what we're looking at.
So I guess so far the focus is more from the health professional side, but what I'm asking is, whether you're going to develop video to increase the awareness of mental health care for the general public.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's also definitely on one of our concerns too, to do that. And that one I know we try to, part of that right now, what we can work on and what we're looking at is definitely we link up with camps and all the associations and such, and they do put out some really good social media aspects about mental health. Right now, the person we're working with has been putting out articles, since it is Mental Health Awareness Month, articles, concerning mental health and working with us to post those. So we'll definitely, that'll be part of the plan too.
And I guess we talk about public service announcement, that kind of media outreach. Are you still considering that, to increase the awareness of mental health and the importance of mental health, to destigmatize mental health issues or problems?
It is definitely on our minds and looking at the plan. It's kind of that fine line, though, for us to put out a public service announcement for mental health. There is a way we can do it. Being the board itself, though, I kind of have hesitancy with actually being the spokesperson for mental health. I don't know how. So it's not. I don't think our purview per se, because we're really involved with licensees and stuff. I definitely think it is our purview to assist to get that message out there. So I think, like with the Mental Health Awareness Month, one thing I think we've kind of fallen down on, which we're going to concentrate on in the future, is Mental Health Awareness Month. Really looking at using our website as kind of like a portal to the different associations and stuff, where they actually can explain more about the importance of mental health. Mm-hmm. So making that connection, more of a connection and not the actual spokesperson.
Do you know if the professional organizations would be taking up the lead to do that, and we can be a co-sponsor or something like that if we are a little bit reluctant to be the lead agency to do that kind of advocacy?
Well, they already do. There's a couple organizations that are doing a really good job of putting that out there. It's just it's a matter for us to really strengthen that connection through our footprint, if that makes sense. The mental health Department of Mental Health does a good stuff. There's a California Association of Mental Health, I think, has a really good website. That would be something that we can maybe, position that more in front on our website, saying, hey, it's Mental Health Awareness Month. Please go to here, and it's a report. It shows you how important getting help is. So I just it's that bridging the gap of, I would love to do public service announcements about how about the importance, but with the money and our task and what we're tasked with, I just kind of don't know if we can go there.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for indulging me to ask those questions.
I actually have a thought too. So it's actually really exciting to see that you're going to include workforce development activities in some of these videos, especially targeting far back as high school and middle school, especially with all the stigma connected to it. So one thought may be to, as you conceptualize these videos, see how you might be able to advocate for or articulate the usefulness of high school pathway programs, which are a strong pipeline for health-related fields, where people in high school and middle school are actually exposed to industry providers. They're offered internships in local community, like in San Francisco County. We have a program in one of the local high schools where the students do work on site. They're in a healthcare carve-out, and they also do internships in the Department of Public Health, just to expose them to career opportunities that they may not necessarily in their natural sort of environment have access to. So, advocating for that would also be a strong benefit as we look at diversifying and sort of preparing for the future retirement of all these baby boomers and things of that nature, so that we have a workforce moving forward.
I think that sounds like an excellent newsletter article, actually, to be honest with you. That
I don't have to
sounds
write
good.
it, do I?
You want to write it?
I said I don't have to write it, do I?
No, but I think that's that's what we were looking at. Is I think the newsletter also is something that gets pushed aside a lot with the social media and website. But the newsletter also, Christy has been doing a really good job of getting that kind of back resurrected. And we are looking at ideas of, that would be a great article for that. But putting more articles out there to kind of explain mental health and also a therapist's experience and stuff like that to make it more lively and worthwhile.
And she can reach out to me. I was going to say she can reach out to me if she wants to collaborate on that.
Okay.
I'd be more than happy to help.
Thank you.
As you make videos, can you please make sure that the people on there are diverse racially, ethnically, age-wise, religiously, like women in hijabs, because you want it to look like the people you're serving, right? Like California. And then the other piece is just some information for you and for the organizations as well. On our campus, we did a social justice activity to find out what students on our campus thought seeking counseling was for, and they went back to like crazy people, psychotic people. There are a lot of people who still believe that therapy is just for someone who's having a psychotic break, basically, and they don't understand adjustment issues, development issues, relationship issues. So just as a point of awareness that even on a college campus full of millennials and Gen Zers, they had no clue.
Okay.
And I would give everyone the opportunity here. If you want to write an article about something, we can definitely publish it. Or if you have somebody who has an article they thought would be, address that'd be great too. Okay.
Oh, I have this is a quick recommendation. I know for the public affairs team, leveraging celebrities has always been a useful thing. I know I've talked about this in prior boards I've on, because we're in California, we have a lot of talent, and yesterday was a big announcement. Even though we're not part of the UK Commonwealth, the Prince and Princess of was it William and Kate, and then Meghan Markle, who's an American. Their major passion is mental health, so they announced a partnership with Crisis Text Line based in the U.S. They've been here for the past 5 years, and they were they processed over 100 million text messages, and they partnered with their affiliate in UK to really announce that importance that millennials in the way they communicate is texting. And just in the first day alone, they received over 60,000 texts about asking for help for mental health issues, mostly below the age of 18. So that's something that's good for a public affairs team to maybe somehow partner with, just to give more public outreach with mental health issues. So.
Thank you. Moving on to the next item, Kim.
Okay, so here's the topic we all love to
we wait for every year, but this is the election of our officers. Every year we need to select a chair and a vice chair, and the selection has to be done by June 1st, because that's what the Business and Professions Code requires. So at this point, currently our chair is Betty Conley and our vice chair is Max Disposti. But this would be where we would entertain nominations for chair. Oops. Sorry. I'm sorry. And I know better. So, all righty. So for chair, I will open it up for nominations. Peter?
I would like to nominate our current chair, Betty Connolly, for another term.
And
I'll second that.
okay.
Yeah.
1 and 2. And Betty, do you accept the nomination?
Yes.
All righty. Are there any other nominations for chair? All righty. Christina, will you call? Well, I guess I'll call the roll. Okay. Dr. Brew.
Yes.
Christina
Yes.
Wong. Jonathan Maddox.
Yes.
Peter Chu.
Aye.
Betty Conley.
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Christine Witless Bach.
Yes.
Alex Kim.
Yes.
Gabriel Lamb.
Yes.
Congratulations. It's been unanimous. You are chair for another year.
Thank you.
Thank you. I forgot that. All righty. Yes, ma'am.
I'd like to, for vice chair, if you want to.
I'm moving right there. You go right ahead.
I would like to nominate Max again
All
to
righty.
be the vice chair.
And if I can second that?
You may. All righty. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? And any public comment? All righty. Then we will go ahead and call the roll. We'll start over here. Gabriel Lamb. We're voting for Max as vice chair. Okay. Alex Kim.
Yes.
Christine Witless Bach.
Yes.
Max Disposti.
Yes.
Okay. Betty Conley.
Yes.
Peter Chu.
Aye.
Jonathan Maddox.
Yes.
Christina Wong.
Yes.
And Dr. Leah Brew.
Yes.
Congratulations. It's unanimous. My work here is done. Congratulations.
Thank you. Moving on, Steve's item, I think we have a discussion and possible action regarding board fee audit.
Yeah. So to address the fund imbalance that we're looking at in the fiscal year 2021, we had contracted with CPS HR Consulting to do a fee audit because we recognize that our revenue, our basically expenses are outrunning our revenue. So looking at our fees is very important. We got to see where we can make adjustments to those. Having the third party in that is good. They did a nice job. And what I'm going to do is kind of go over to the slides that they were supposed to present that, but because of contract reasons, they couldn't travel. So I'm here going to present that, and it'll keep me on task because with the accounting and stuff, I'm probably going to randomly run around. So hopefully this will keep me on track as we go through. So bear with me. So, like I said, we contracted with CPS HR Consulting, and some of the objectives we looked at when we first met is we were going to look at 25 of our, I consider our main fees, which make up 90% of our fee revenue. And those fees are for initial licensure, associate registrations, exam fees, and renewals. We wanted them to look at our last 4 years of revenue and expenses, and then also project for us the next 3 to 4 years of revenue expenses of what we would need, what they determined that would look like, and from that to look and see what kind of additional revenue we would need to actually bridge the gap in our expenses and revenue. To do that, we went through all our pertinent information, all our fee schedules, fund condition reports, to get a whole historical view of how we've been operating in the last 4 years. They worked with staff and with myself looking at workload assumptions to see what it actually goes into processing an application, doing enforcement actions and such, and basically everything we do. And they used that to determine later on, I'll explain, an hourly rate an hourly rate that we could charge, they think would be best to be able to assume all the expenses that we have. if you look on one of the slides there, on slide 25 selected fee, it's page 67 of the report, I think. That shows you the fees that we looked at. Like I said, they're the registration, the renewals, licensure applications. Interesting thing about that is we are at the statutory maximum for most of those fees, which means we have to actually do some legislation to get those increased. The only one that's not really affected is the LPCC. They came on board in 2012, so at that time, the statutory maximum, we took that into account, and that's, I think, like the licensing, $250. So we're not at that maximum yet, but we are very close. On the next slide, that shows you that of the fees, 90% of our total fee schedule revenue comes from these 25 fees, and 86% of our total revenue comes from these fees. So we have the rest of the fees is non-fee schedule related, and that's surplus money, investments, and interest for interloan funds. Those are the paybacks from our loans, which end, we had the final one this year. So we're not going to have that anymore. So that's something to really take to heart. The next slide shows you that overall we've had a increase in fees, or in the fees collected. For some reason, the associate renewal, I'm going to go back and look at that. I don't know why that was less, 8.3%, a 4-year change. I think we're going to still see that increase overall. But as you can see, initial license issuance and applications for licensure, which are the applications for the clinical exam, those have increased quite a bit over the last 4 years. The next one shows you the overall expenses, and over the last 4 years, our overall expenses have increased significantly. Personnel services, we have, in the 4 years that they studied, we had gained 10 more employees, which along comes with that, the increased salary and benefits. And so that has increased by an average of 35% over the last 4 years. Also, our expenses have increased because of we went on to the Breeze system, and we still are recognizing an increased fees for that, and then the statewide prorata, and as you know, in the enforcement actions, as reported before, enforcement actions keep going up and up, and the cost also. So as you can see, our total expenses have, over the last 4 years, increased 51%. The next slide shows you the current projected fund balance. As we've reported in the budget before too, it looks like in fiscal year 2021 we will see an imbalance, and that's what we're concerned about. So they had recommended that we would, with the fees that they proposed, which we can see later on I think it's page 46, if we were able to increase the fees beginning, I believe it was, their assumptions were July 1st, 2020, which we'll have to talk about, and we'll plan on that for later. But if we were able to increase the fees, we would see, as you see, $3.3 million during the second half of 2021, and we would be able to correct that imbalance a little bit. We'd have half a month in reserves. So additionally, if we went with their proposal, we would gain another $6 million every year, which should then bring our balance up eventually in 23-24 fiscal year to a 5-month reserve. And that's 3 months to 5 months reserve is what I think we really want to look at. So to develop the cost per minute that they derived from, they looked at the last 3 fiscal years of average expenditures, and then they looked at staff hours. They divided the average expenditures by the staff hours to determine the fully absorbable cost, and that came down to $120 per hour or $2 per minute. It's kind of weird to look at that, $2 per minute. Makes me think so. With that, part of the assumptions in that too, it was not just a matter of we had to take into account, it's easy to account for the processing time of going through an application and actually processing it. They also took into account the administration functions of the board, as in, I mean, like the, phone service, personnel activities, executive, what we do. They took into account enforcement activities and kind of spread those out around all the different fees to make sure those were accounted for. On page 75, it's kind of self-explanatory. To come up with the proposed fees, they took the workload assumptions and multiplied it by the $2 per minute. So that's where they came up. That's how they came up with the proposed fees. The resulting fees were anywhere from some of them don't raise at all, up to $315 for one of the fees. So, and they're assuming that if we begin implementation in January 2020, we should start seeing a projected revenue. It should help out to reach that to get us so we won't be insolvent in 23-24.
Steve?
Yeah.
Are they taking into account the rate of growth that we've been having and continuing that growth into the future? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, these assumptions are based everything. I mean, they do have the growth. They looked at that too. Who knows what will happen the next growth?
We'll be 20,000 people in no time.
Yeah, it's going to be pretty great.
So also, it's the the recommendation is to start at 2020, and this is already 2019. And so, if delay for 1 year implementation due to all these regulation, that we have to go through, through the legislature. So will that, how does it going to affect, the reserve and the operation? Because next year we're going to come into very, very low.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how does it going to work?
Well, that's what we'll be doing, actually. I mean, through this, we're presenting the report right now, and what we're really going to have to look at is, we're getting started as soon as possible here. That being said, we have to go through the process. So I think our plan is presenting this. We'll go back, look at we'll talk a little bit after this, just to kind of show you the fees and on the raising the fees. We'll propose what we think the fees should be raised to, and then at that time we can probably come back with assumptions of what we see, give you a better idea of what that fund will look like, project it out to see what we're thinking we'll experience, what we will experience with the actual process going through. If we're not able to make the mark 2020, which January we're not going to be able to make the fee changes by that time. So how that's going to affect our projections later on, we'll come back with that too. So. 76 was kind of like an overall, page 76, there's a summary of findings. So we've seen an increase in staff over 20% over the last 4 years. A lot of that's due to program changes. We had an extra licensing population come on. We had the exam restructure. So we had a lot of work that we needed to address and staff to do that. We had the Breeze come on board, and also the enforcement, as we talked about, it just keeps increasing, the enforcement actions and processes. Of the 25 fees studied, there was a 39% increase, but it hasn't kept up with the expenditures, which have increased to 42% over the same 4 years. And the big thing is we haven't raised fees for around 20 years. And in fact, we even lowered the fees once because we were getting too much reserve. But since for 20 years they haven't been raised. That's not necessarily true for LPCC since they came on board in 2011 and 12. But yeah, so for 20 years. And doing a real quick study of other boards and license types, we're pretty cheap comparatively. Not that that means anything, but we are. So. And they determined that beginning 16, 17, continuing revenue has not covered expenditures and so the revenue has not covered expenditures. We have been kind of relying on that payback, the loan payback, for the last few years. So it's no longer there. So that's why we really need to get not concerned, but at work to get these fees raised. So the recommendation is kind of what we were talking about. We're going to look at their fees that they proposed, come up with a fee schedule that we think would be appropriate, and then march forward. And either one of the things is, first of all, getting the fees raised, but also part of that is going to make sure that we don't get into the position where we have that statutory maximum so low, and looking at creative ways to allow us in the future to be able to raise fees more expeditiously if needed. So,
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I guess my question is, as this process moves forward, is there going to be sort of a consideration of parity of what particular licensees are currently paying and how close they are to the statutory limit versus other licenses that are a little further away and may be paying significantly less than what the statutory limit is, and trying to counterbalance sort of maybe one license either making no or limited increases versus another license maybe making a little more adjustments to sort of build some parity within the licensing structure, since we're looking at parity in other areas related to the licenses also?
well, I think I would definitely consider parity. I mean, in regards to parity, the processes that every licensee goes through, there's really not that much difference between our license types. The workload is practically the same through all license types. So it is kind of weird that we do have right now. There's no parity within the license type. So everyone has a different fee, except for associates. They have the same fee. But we'll definitely, I mean, parity is a big thing to look at, but I think I'm looking at it as parity as what's involved in doing that workload. And the workload is essentially the same. I mean, so I think...
you mean the workload of the staff who are sort of facilitating the process for that license type?
Process of the workload of the staff and what we do to actually get the person licensed, reviewing their application, enforcement actions, everything. Especially with enforcement actions, that's kind of like the parity, you can't really split that out. But basically, that's what we have to look at is just, the cost of doing operations. And I would say if there was a difference in the process itself, in the workload process, like looking at someone's application and reviewing their stuff, that might generate, looking at a difference in fee. But I think I think when we look at it, it's going to be parity, as in I think everyone will probably see the same fee for the application types, like initial licensure for your initial license applications will probably be the same fee across the board. LPCCs, that might be the only thing that I could see we might not change just because it just came on board. But that being said, there's still a lot of, I mean, not a lot of work, but work to be done for the next meeting so we can then present that.
Sure.
So we can
And just one final question. And the process for that is those recommendations will be identified and then brought back to the board to be discussed?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, our goal is, I mean, we really need to get on the legislation process and such. So the faster we get it out there, I think the plan is, and hopefully I'm not wrong, and that's kind of discussed really quick, is at the next Policy and Advocacy Committee, maybe bringing some language forward about what we're looking at for fees to get that started so that we can have it at the board meeting in September and kind of move forward.
Yeah.
And a quick question. Steve, is there an idea about, I understand the urgency and the needs, obviously, but is there an idea to scale up the increase of fees, or is it just going to happen once we approve it? Is it going to be happening all at once?
Well, so, I mean, we definitely have to take that under consideration because I don't want to, we don't want to adversely affect everyone.
Right.
At the same time, we really need to have, we need to have the money to operate. Albeit, I hate to increase the fee, and this, I'm not saying this is going to what's happened, but I hate to increase a fee like 300% and say that's what it's going to be now. That's not realistic. But I mean, I don't know. So it wouldn't be. I think we would take that into consideration too, like putting a statutory maximum. Maybe we can see. We can talk in the board meetings when we get the proposal out there. Yes, if we can do it this much for this year. It's just, I think with increasing that, you're going to have to come back every year.
And fee increases are tough to get through, honestly.
Right. No, I understand.
mean, the legislature, I mean, everybody's very sensitive to it. So we have to balance that with our needs versus, how many bites of the apple we're going to get. I think we're well positioned to whatever we recommend, we're well positioned to get. I don't know that if we set the bar a little bit lower with the plan to raise it a little bit more in subsequent years, I don't know that that's going to work.
Yeah, I understand how it works. My idea was if we authorize a cap or some percentage and then we grow into that percentage. I understand the legislative, every year you don't want to do this, but I was wondering if, I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just trying to see if that was taken in consideration, if there is some sort of view about how this is going to be implemented. That was just...
Well, yeah, I think that one thing, we'll set statutories probably higher so that it make it a little bit easier for the future.
And we'll be discussing a bill later, and I'll let Roseanne speak to that very quickly.
We're going to be discussing a bill going through the legislature right now that allows fees to be raised by the CPI every 4 years. So that we'll know a little bit more about if that's going to be passing. We should know by the end of September. So that'll kind of probably play into the decision when we set the fees maybe a little bit too. But we don't have an answer if that's going to pass yet or not. But we will in a few months.
All right.
Thank you. Is there any public comment? Jen Lee.
Jan Lee Wong, NASW. In general, we support the bill that you're talking about, but we have received some pushback from our members. And of course, nobody wants to pay more money. So I think it'd be helpful if we at least considered along the way so that we can tell members that this was considered along the way. Several items. The first one would be if there's any way that you could come up with some statistics or data on the average income of licensees and what is the growth per year of the income of licensees. Because sadly, in the last 10 to 15 years, we've seen insurance reimbursements go down, not go up. And so many of our members actually have to have 2 or 3 jobs, to support their practice. Basically, when they call, we tell them, well, you'll probably have to get a day job and then do your practice in the evenings and on weekends. That's the only way to make it work. The other thing is, I know you've done a little bit of study of cost per licensee and applicant. If you could look that over again, and if you're dividing it up by the different licenses and applicants, this follows with your concept of reviewing your personnel, especially because you have some vacancies. And so one idea there would be, and it's probably a big paradigm shift, but have less specialization and more generalization among personnel so that you'd have more flexibility with your personnel. I know it's pretty specialized for good reason because the licenses are pretty specialized, but you've done a lot of good work towards standardization over the years. You really have. So maybe there's something you could find in that. And then you probably looked at this already, and if you have, that would be great if you could tell us what you found. Looking at either longer or shorter renewal periods. I know there are pros or cons for both of them, but if it's a little bit longer, it might be a little bit, even though it would be more money, it might be a little bit easier for licensees, and vice versa. If it's a little shorter, it might be less amounts of money, but more frequently. And I know that there's a personnel cost to either change, so I understand that. And then, of course, we always like to pick on those being disciplined. So is the actual cost of the disciplinary proceedings and the subsequent monitoring of the discipline by the board, is that commensurate with the fines and any recompense that those discipline perhaps might have to pay? Because if they're found to have violated whatever statute or code or regulation, they should pay for it. And I know it's pretty tough for them but, that's sort of the consequence of being unethical or unprofessional.
Thank you. Any additional comment from the public? Oh, sorry, Christina.
Let's let the public go first.
It's fine.
Luke Martin from CAMPS. When it comes to renewal, what I've seen previously done with different associations, especially with the California Bar Association, is that they cap it. So essentially what happens is if you have an income over $50,000, then you have to pay the full fee. Anything under $50,000, you're able to pay a reduced or subsidized fee. Now, that would require you to actually monitor that and check it, but it would be a way to kind of ameliorate some of the issues with increasing fees due to the fact that some individuals have lesser income. So if you cap it or create an arbitrary limit, and then it might be limiting the amount of problems that you have.
Thank you. I think we had some additional comment from board members.
Yeah. So I really concur with what Jan Lee said about the members, about the licensees and the registrants, their the hardship and and the difficulties of paying for the fee, because I hear it all the time, when they're ready for examination, they have to pay the fee, and then they have to pay, the national examination fee. They don't know what really belongs to the board or not, but it's that conception that they continuously need to pay. So fee is such a, sensitive subject to them. And so I'm wondering, whether it's possible maybe for the board to develop some talking points, and some, some information so that the association, can also take those very concrete and precise information to educate the public, especially when we said that, we haven't raised the fee for 20 years. A lot of those new people, they don't care because they just enter the fee. They just enter the field. So I think, for that education, that would probably, increase that understanding, why it is necessary. And so that, we can, take the time to educate them and also to prepare them. So that's just my little suggestion.
I think we can do that. I think that there is a common misperception that we take money from the general fund, and we absolutely do not. We receive no money from the general fund, and as evidenced by the budget report today, we actually loan money to the general fund. So there is that. There's also the misperception that we issue citations and fines to, fill our coffer. That's also not true. That money is some of the expenses that come in, or the revenue that comes in that lower budgeted amount that Steve talked about. They're unanticipated. We don't know. And even if I wanted to touch that money, I can't. I cannot touch that money. Our budget is structured in, if you have $13 million as a budget, you cannot spend $13 million and a penny. You can only spend up to $13 million. So, it's a little different, but I think educating folks and our stakeholders is a good idea. I tried to do a little of that at camp when we were talking about the fee increase, and I understand we're hitting everyone's checkbook. If you look at the proposal right now, the hardest hit's going to be the associates, and that's the group that has the least amount of money. So from my perspective, that seems very inequitable.
Right.
So that's why we want to sit back and kind of see where we can balance everything. And to Jonathan's point, and as part of the recommendation, an application is an application. There should be some parity across the way. Mm-hmm. So. And frankly, it would be easier for me when I take the phone call when they ask me how much those fees are. I don't have to go look at them. But I know that we're going to go back and look at this from not only a practical standpoint, because we do have to keep our operations moving forward and anticipate growth. And we've got to be responsive to our applicants and stakeholders. But I also think there's going to be a lot of sensitivity to individuals' situation. We all have household budgets, and one extra expense can throw it out of whack. So I appreciate that. So we'll do what we can.
Leah?
One thing you may also want to mention is that when we made more parity among the professions with reducing the categories for MFTs, that helped make the process a little more efficient. So it could have been a lot worse.
I actually had a question about, did I understand that what you said was that the fees related to enforcement can't have to stay in enforcement? Did I hear that?
No, the reimbursements.
Okay.
So the reimbursements when they pay us back for the investigation costs, or when we issue a citation and fine, the fine money, that goes into a separate pot. It does not, I mean, we account for it in revenue, but it's revenue I cannot touch. It goes into the fund condition.
Okay. So in responding to Jan Lee's idea of increasing the enforcement fees,
right?
That what you're saying is that wouldn't help us overall in
No.
terms of our operating expenses.
No, it would give us more in our little savings account or our fund condition, but it's not money I can tap into. The only time we would ever be able to tap into that money is if you had an EO that didn't concern if your budget went into the red. But I'm a little concerned because if we go into the red, then I'm personally responsible. So I'm sensitive to that. I like my house. I'd like to keep it.
Well, and just one more question. As we work through some of our disciplinary cases and we look at the costs related to discipline, I've heard that we don't always, that the actual costs of the investigation are often not even adequately covered by the fees.
Well, we in that situation, what happens is we get the total amount, and that's what is proposed because the law says we can recover costs. It's rare that they pay the entire cost of the investigation because not only if you're putting them on probation, you've got other costs associated with that they're paying for. There's part, like the fluid testing and the therapy and the such. And so many times we will not charge them the full amount in consideration of that in the idea in settlement that you're going to get the discipline on record. So,
thank you.
We also,
Max?
No, addressing that, we also, thinking about the people going probation, we are always trying to have an approach that's not per se punitive. And we know that some of them also end up paying between $20,000 to $40,000 in expenses throughout the period of 3-5 years of probation, and becomes so we want them back, right? Even though they have a responsibility for what they did. So I don't know. It's an interesting idea, but I don't know if that's going to really pan out in terms of really creating a system that's also, once again, it's not punitive per se, but really creates an opportunity for folks to come back after they went through the probation period. Otherwise, we'll make a financial obstacles that per se only few people can afford to address. The rest of them will not be able to do it. And we've seen that before too. I stop it there.
Leah?
So one of the things that comes to mind for me when we talk about probation, the expensive probation is really for DUI or substance abuse situations, convictions. And because they can now do the monthly testing, is there some way that we can set it up where they just do that? I mean, that alone is like, $500 a month for the random. So if we did it just monthly random, that's a huge savings right there. And
it would be ideal if we could, except the 1441 uniform standards set the frequency by which we're required to test for the first year. But if they're compliant and no violations, then we can move it down. We can reduce the frequency without them having to come to the board. And we're already doing that.
Okay, because I guess when they made that law, the technology didn't exist. And how do we go about trying to advocate for modifying that law since we have technology that looks at your hair and everything's there?
Yeah, well, what's happened is that they've reconvened the committee to address that.
Oh,
and
good.
Having attended that committee, there's not much appetite for reducing the frequency.
Wow, that's compassionate.
Yes.
So I wonder, if the staff will actually, come, I think you mentioned that, the staff are going to go back and look at, really draft some, specific ideas, how the fee schedule is going to be. So, and that's going to go back to the P&A meeting first, right? For the committee to consider, to receive feedbacks from the stakeholders and then come back to the full board. Okay. So I think that probably we will have a little bit more ideas.
Right.
How that is going to go. Right now we're kind of all freaking out, how that's going to look like.
Exactly. And I think like everyone else, everyone's like, oh no, it's going to be more money.
Exactly.
And I get it. I really, really, really get it. But at the end of the day, if we don't raise fees, we're going to be in the red, which means I can't administer exams. I'm going to have to stop enforcement cases. I'm not going to be able to hire, even though the population is going to continue to increase. It's one of the realities of operating a business. It just is. I mean, 20 years ago, I know none of us were paying $4 for a gallon for gas. I mean, I remember paying under $1. So and it was great. But boy, did I like that. Man, that was good. But we're 20 years down the road. Things cost more, unfortunately.
I just, at the end of the day, I think it's all about creating those tools to educate the public so that we don't come as just, like any other agency. We have, I think, the responsibility to be, as we are, transparent and continuing that, but really thinking outside the box on the tools that we can use to do that.
Absolutely.
I think that's just as a recommendation.
Good, thank you.
Gabriel had a comment. Gabriel?
Yes, I just wanted to comment that I did actually renew my licenses this week.
Yay.
And as you know, I'm dually licensed. I paid $120 for the LCSW, and I paid $195 for the LPCC. That's a $70 difference. I understand that nobody wants fee increases. I don't want to pay more if I don't have to. But when it comes to insurance reimbursements, if we really think about it and consider a low reimbursement rate is about $60 to $75. So that takes you about 2 hours of work so that you can pay for your single license for 2 years. So I'm not sure that an increase is a bad thing per se, but we just need to make the public aware that a licensee will only have to work 2 hours approximately to keep their license for 2 years.
That's a nice perspective. Yes. Thank you, Gabriel.
I have another thought too. So I think along with that, I'm wondering, since we as a board collect fees from certain licensees that goes into the mental health education fund, is there a way for us to advocate for creating loan repayment programs that may be able to mitigate that? I know some of the programs that exist at OSHPD have sunset or are sunsetting. And so I don't know if there's a way for us to sort of advocate for that or even inform associates that these programs exist, especially those who work in underserved, inappropriately served communities. And so they're really sacrificing maybe by working in local community-based organizations, taking less money because they're working through their values. If there's a loan repayment program that could support that, that might counterbalance and make this more palatable. Because on one end they're paying more, but on the other end somebody's advancing sort of the decrease in their loan debt.
Okay, that concludes the comments on that. Okay, so then, how long do you think this is going to be?
2 seconds.
Okay, so let's move on to item 17, the update on exam vendor contract. Steve?
Hi, so we are seeking a contract with Pearson VUE to be our next test vendor, and currently we are working with the contracts unit. We submitted the actual contract scope of work to the contracts unit in February, and they are working closely with us. I'd like to get a shout out to them. They're doing a really good job of keeping us informed of what's going on and any concerns. Our goal was to have that contract actually signed, sealed, and delivered on July 1st, 2019. Not sure that's going to happen. So We are working towards that, though. I'd like to see it happen at that point. That being said, we are looking at starting actually the switch over to the new vendor in late summer or early fall. And that would give us enough time if we got the actual contract signed by July 1st or somewhere near there. We would have the appropriate time to not only, first of all, inform everyone about the processes and procedures that are going to be in place and what they need to do with their exam eligibility, but it's going to also allow us the time to really test to make sure everything is going good and we have all the mechanisms in place so that we have a smooth transition. And I expect it to be a smooth transition. It should be fairly simple as opposed to some of the exam stuff that we've gone through in the last few years. The big concern, it's already rumbling out there, people are really concerned that we're going to be holding scores. We are not going to be holding scores. That being said, I think I put in there, I think the write-up is, we do not expect any delays in scores. That being said, I 100%, 99% guarantee that will not happen. We won't have any delay in scores, but I can't guarantee anything. We will not be holding scores intentionally, though. So that's the thing. Like last time, we had to hold them for like 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks. So we're not going to be doing that this time. Also, the minute we get the contract signed, we will start broadcasting details to all the current exam applicants and anybody, or just basically putting out the information on some of the issues of what you'll have to do if you currently have a special accommodations for an exam. How do you apply? What do you do if you currently have your eligibility over at PSI? We'll be sending out all that information. So one of the big things we're trying to do now is control the messages out there. We are already getting feedback from the excellent Facebook groups and such. So I would recommend, please, if anybody's listening out there, or you can tell people, go to the website, follow us on the Facebook or social media. Get your email address in our system so we can kind of get in touch with you then. If you hear a rumor about something, don't go to Facebook to confirm it, that it's true, because it might not be. Luckily, there's some good administrators that I'm working with. They call and some of the big questions that pop up, so I'm able to talk to them about that. But please go to the board for your information for that, and we will, recognizing we kind of learned from the exam restructure, so we know. We will be putting out a lot of information. So we are currently, even though we do not have the contract signed yet, we are currently working on putting all the mechanisms and structures in place. We've been in consultation with DCA's OAS and OPES to make sure we know what we have to do in the next few months to get this rolling. And Pearson has been very good at communicating with us and planning and working on that. So we'll be ready to hit the ground real quick once that contract is signed. So there you have it. Any questions?
So for me, just a little clarification. So follow us on Facebook, the official BBS BBS group, not the other ones, to get information.
Well, follow the other ones. They're good too because it's a good. I mean, I don't want to say but no. If you have a question, like the one that just came up was, people were saying that they were making assumptions of special accommodations and what needs to be done. And it was kind of a combination of both. It was a combination of discussions within the board where somebody was having a conversation with an associate. And I'm sure they didn't say, this is what needs to be done, but sometimes the message gets misinterpreted, and so then it got misinterpreted to it was law that you have to reapply for your. I'm not saying that is the case. You might have to. We'll put that out there, but go to those places to talk to your fellow associates and stuff because it's a great platform. But if you're questioning what's going to happen with the board and the exams, rely on us.
My second question is, the first question is that do you anticipate there will be a 1 week shutdown in order to do the transition?
I'm actually not. I am not expecting at this point a shutdown. So originally we were thinking about that would have to take place, but at this point, I don't believe we are going to have a shutdown.
So there's, actually, will be a smooth transition from, one place to the other. Because I'm thinking, the reason why I'm saying that is because, I think the scheduling, it's different, So I don't know how you can actually have two systems in place so that they can schedule so far ahead and saying that, okay, PSI is not going to be the vendor anymore, and then to be able to, to use Pearson VUE, So just practically, I guess that the staff will handle it, but at the same time, I think it's important for the registrants to know how they where they're going to go to sign up.
And that's exactly what the minute I can actually put down that stuff in writing, we're going to put that out there. The transition will be more or less if you have eligibility at PSI, you can schedule for 3 months ahead of time at PSI. And so within the next few months, what will probably end up, the transition, if you're at PSI at the time, we'll have a cutoff date of sending eligibilities over to PSI. If you're over at PSI, I believe at this point, in my mind, in our plan, we're thinking about you'd be able to test at PSI still and run those eligibilities out for the 3 months from the date we stop eligibility. Beyond that, then you would have to apply and you'd go over to Pearson. So, yeah, we'll definitely explain everything out. So,
Steve, could you repeat what you said earlier about not sending out test results to? Well, maybe I misheard or misunderstood. I wanted to get a clarification.
So, when we went through the exam restructure in 2016, we actually had to hold exam results. So people would take the exam, and then we held the results because it was a new test that we were putting out there. And so we needed a couple weeks to actually review the test to make sure it was working appropriately. So you take the exam, you wouldn't get your results for a couple weeks. So, and that definitely causes issues because at the same time we have part of that exam restructure was you have to have taken the exam to renew as an associate. So that won't happen this time because it's not a new exam. We're not really testing the exam. The only complication I could see happening, if any, would be when we transfer the actual exam over to the new vendor. Something happens in there, but it's not going to really affect the candidates, and they'll get their exams immediately, their results immediately.
Okay. Any public comment? No. Then we are going to move to a 15-minute break. It's about 10:05. We're going to come back at 10:20. Thank you. We are going to go out of order with our next item and move forward to subsection E, which is Assembly Bill 1651 Medina.
Are we ready?
Roseanne, I think we'll turn it over to you.
Yes. So AB 1651 is authored by Assemblymember Medina, and it is sponsored by the California Association of School Psychologists, or CASP. And it has to do with licensed educational psychologists' supervision of associates and trainees. There are a couple of different handouts to this bill that I'll discuss at the end of my presentation of what the bill actually does. The first is a supplemental material with some CASP proposed amendments, and then the other one is a loose item that you should have either received at the beginning of the meeting from me today, or if you did not, there are some materials on the table outside the door, so you definitely want to pick that up. That has some proposed amendments where we're thinking we can drop some clarifying information in there. So I'll go ahead and get started discussing the bill. The bill would allow applicants for licensure as a marriage and family therapist, professional clinical counselor, or clinical social worker to gain some supervised experience hours under a licensed educational psychologist. Currently, these applicants for licensure have to they have to register as an associate after graduation from their master's program and gain 3,000 supervised experience hours under a qualified supervisor in order to obtain licensure. The law sets various requirements for supervisors of the supervised experience. They have to be actively licensed in California as an LPCC, LMFT, LCSW, psychologist, or psychiatrist. Currently, LEPs are not a recognized supervisor type. Supervisors of AMFTs and APCCs who do not hold the same license as the associate's intended field of licensure have to have sufficient experience to competently practice in that field. And then for social workers, the law is written a little different. Social workers, they have to gain a specific number of hours under an LCSW, 1,700 of their 3,000 hours. Under the new supervision regulations that are going through, there's some consistent language across the license types that says all supervisors have to be competent to practice in the field of the associate they're supervising. The law does set very specific requirements for licensed educational psychologists, just like it does for our other license types. LEPs also are required to have a master's degree, just like our other license types. It has to be in school psychology or an equivalent field. They have to have 60 semester hours of postgraduate work in pupil personnel services, 2 years of full-time experience as a credentialed school psychologist, and then they have to have an additional year of supervised experience and pass a licensing exam. And then the law also defines pretty specifically a scope of practice for licensed educational psychologists. I've included that in attachment D in your packet. And one of the things that the scope of practice specifies is that educational psychologists can provide psychological counseling for individuals, groups, and families. So this bill proposes allowing the board's educational psychologists to be supervised if they meet all of the other board's requirements to be a supervisor. It limits the hours that can be gained under a supervision of an LEP to no more than 1,200 hours out of the required 3,000. And then it adds some unprofessional conduct provisions to LEP licensing law. Since they're going to be supervising, they need to have the corresponding unprofessional conduct provisions related to supervision. The California Association of School Psychologists, in sponsoring this bill, discusses that a 2011 law change shifted the responsibility to provide special education for students' mental health services from county mental health departments to the school districts. The mental health services that school districts provide to students with disabilities are called educationally related mental health services, and also referred to as ERMs today. That's the acronym for it. And ERMs can occur in both educational and in clinical settings. Its purpose is to provide mental health support so that students can access their education program. CASP notes that many school districts are employing BBS associates, AMFTs, ASWs, and APCCs, to provide ERMs, and that the law requires ERM services to be provided by someone who the law requires ERM service providers to be supervised by someone who holds a pupil personnel services credential. LEPs happen to have a PPS credential and training in the educational system, which makes them an ideal candidate to possibly supervise these types of hours. However, they're not permitted to. But I point out that currently allowed supervisors of BBS associates, the LMFTs, LPCCs, and LCSWs, do not necessarily have a pupil personnel services credential or the specialized training in the educational system that LEPs have. So right now where we're at with this bill in the language, we discussed the bill at the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting. The committee recommended the board consider taking a support if amended position on the bill, and it recommended that the bill be amended to limit LEP supervision of associates to ERMS services only. And so we've been in contact between that meeting and now trying to work on a definition of what ERMS services is, or what's the appropriate setting that LEPs would be allowed to supervise in. How do we define that? So we've been doing some work, and that's where the attachments come in. You'll see in your packet there's a supplemental attachment with CASP's proposed amendments. They've provided an amendment that has a definition of ERMS in it. I have also prepared in a supplemental attachment, there's some language that you'll see in underline and strike out that basically says a licensed educational psychologist may only supervise in this setting, and it just allows the acceptable setting, whatever that may be, what's discussed today, to be dropped in to that language. So a couple of things that we can consider in our discussion and use those materials hopefully as a reference today. And then there's some other attachments to the bill. We've got a presentation of CAF's previous summary to the board and the Policy and Advocacy Committee, a support letter from Dr. Judy Johnson, who used to be a board member, to the bill, and then also some BBS staff research. So with that, we could open up for discussion. I will say that I got an email from Kenneth Edwards, who's the chair of, or who's the director of CalPIC, the LPCC Association. They could not be here today, but asked me to pass along information on a few bills, and he just said that he appreciates the board's thoughtful recommendations on the bill, but CalPIC will not be taking a position on the bill. So with that said, we can open it for discussion.
Yeah, and just, I would like to open it for discussion, but I also wanted to add that in our conversation about defining educationally related mental health services, and I have spoken with Roseanne about this, and as well as our CASP affiliate, that the Ed Code, state Ed Code, and federal law is non-prescriptive when it comes to defining related services, and that applies to all of the related services, from speech therapy, occupational therapy, mental health services, and that the definition of any of those related services, the key is that they are necessary for the student with disabilities to be able to access their education. That's the definition for all of the related services, and it would apply also to ERMS. So we are talking about educationally related mental health services for students with disabilities that are necessary for them to be able to access their education. So just wanted to put that out there, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that definition? So is that limited to students who have been identified by their particular school district, have been approved for ERM services, and have an active IEP?
That is correct.
Only those students?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Also, another clarifying question. So Betty, what you're saying, it seems to me that there's not a regulation to clarify in the education code. What really ERMS is about.
What I'm saying is that any of the related services. So ERMS is a related service. The individual districts, SELPAs, there's guidelines about, for example, speech. And I'm going to just kind of give speech therapists as an example. Federal law doesn't say exactly what therapies are needed or exactly what those services look like any more than it does for any of the other related services, including ERMS. Individual districts may craft some criteria that address those, but it's not prescriptive at either the state or the federal level, and nor should it be. I mean, they really are professional decisions that are made with best practices in mind and standards of the profession. So with that, I mean, I'll open it up to our board members, and of course also want to hear from the public. Leah?
I'm in support of this. I'm great with the addition. I know that a lot of counselors who are trying to provide therapy in schools have real difficulty finding supervisors, and this would help take care of that need, and particularly where schools are getting less and less funding. And my hope is the bill that's going through to increase the ratios of school counselors would include trainees and associates as part of that, because I think the more people we can get in schools, the fewer, let's say, school shootings we'll have in the future. So we could do a lot of violence prevention and support for low-income kids in particular who may need additional support from their financial circumstances.
And I actually appreciate you saying that, because one of the, I guess, underlying motivations for this bill is that accessing mental health services for students in a connected, meaningful way is hugely important right now in particular.
Yes.
And we are facing challenges, districts are facing challenges in the levels of supervision that are required in order for a licensee to practice in a school setting. And those barriers are not only keeping districts and students from accessing the services that they need, but it makes for a choppy and disconnected experience for the provider as well as for the students, because the clinical perspective that most supervisors bring, while it is certainly very, very valuable, it doesn't necessarily reflect the needs specific to an educationally related service that is really, really targeted and focused on a student being able to access their education. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
And I would add to that, so many of our supervisors haven't been trained in working with children, and I think particularly K through 6, and they're trying to apply methodologies that are more appropriate for more fully developed brains. So with people who really want to specialize in this area and have experience and have not just that one class in child development, but have been steeped in understanding developmental issues and how that modifies the way you need to work with your clients. And I was really pleased to see also that they can still contract with external agencies, but what would be nice is under the LEP, then the files could be kept possibly at the school, because it really makes me uncomfortable when they have to travel with confidential files in their car, even if they have them locked up. It's just not good. So I really think this is helpful for public protection as well.
Thank you.
So we discussed it pretty thoroughly at the Policy and Advocacy Committee meeting, and I just want to appreciate the staff, working with the stakeholders to really come up with that definition of ERMS, because I think that was, one of the scratching head moment. It's like, there's not really definition out there. And so I just really, love, how it reflected, it reflects the scope of the ERMS and really provide a definition. And, and also acknowledging the challenges of, you have to really craft, some language and, to be inclusive, with all the services and best practice that's, in the state. And, it looks fine with me. So, yeah, I want to just acknowledge that.
Jonathan?
So yeah, I appreciate all of the work that's gone into this, and am very sensitive to the needs of educational settings to provide support services and mental health services to students who qualify for ERMS services. I have been previously an AB 3632 provider. Somebody's mic is humming. And so I'm fully aware, or to the extent that my experience speaks to it, of the need for those services and how those services are actually played out. But I have been sort of in ongoing opposition to this. I'm really trying to find ways to sort of collaborate and figure out how we could build a bridge toward it, but I'm haven't heard certain things even in the proposed legislation that actually speaks to the developing therapist. You know, a lot of this language speaks to the need of the school districts and the students, but there is a therapist there who's developing, and somebody's mic is that mine?
It's your mic.
That's what I get for being in opposition? But very little of this language is actually speaking to the needs of the actual therapists that I'm actually very concerned about. There are things that MFT students, LPCC students, social work students get in graduate school related to theoretical orientation, the importance of a relational therapeutic stance, sort of managing and sort of preparing sort of documentation that meets Medi-Cal standards and standards that come down from the Department of Healthcare Services that I don't think, and I could be wrong, maybe when we get public comment somebody will tell me whether or not LEPs are sort of versed in that language. I'm aware that a lot of the work that LEPs do and a lot of the assessments are really around functional behavioral impairments and how those may impact sort of a student's ability to make use of the academic setting. So with that said, I just have questions that I think would be useful for us to discuss as we look at this. Is one, Roseanne, you mentioned earlier that if this were to go forward, that LEPs would be responsible for the same requirements that an MFT supervisor would have. Would that mean they'd have to take a supervision course? They'd have to have practice two of the last 5 years?
Yes, they would. They would have to have an active California license, have practiced or provided therapy or supervision to the past 5 years, and they would have to do the required supervision agreements, the training, things like that.
Okay. So is there any thought or consideration about LEPs and taking a law and ethics class? Most of the other licensees take a law and ethics class related to just law and ethics related to the laws and regulations related to that. So I don't know if they already do that, or is that something that
they would do that as part of their continuing education requirements. They have to have the 6 hours of law and ethics every 2 years to renew.
And within their exam to become licensed as an LEP, there is the incorporation of law and ethics in the exam content and questions.
Okay. So I guess backing up a little bit, I'm wondering sort of the other things that I brought up about sort of the unique nature of the therapeutic stance, the theoretical orientation that an MFT, social work, and LPCC student holds as they do their work, and sort of documentation needs and things of that nature. I'm wondering what the other board members' thoughts are about how an LEP would supervise to that, because those are key components of the work that a therapist does. It's not just the work in the setting and being supervised to a setting. There are certain skill sets and competencies that they have to embody in order to engage and sort of remain aligned with the client and also do the administrative responsibilities that come along with doing that work.
Christina and then Leah.
I think in the, we talked about before about the hours of, being allowed, for the LEP to supervise. So I think, when we look at 3,000 hours, clinical hours, or, including some of the non-clinical, so 1,200 is actually a really good balance, between, having the more comprehensive, practice and learning, for different modality. And so, so the school is really a different beast itself. I used to work, many years, also, part of the, in the county mental health, working in the school setting. And I firsthand, I know, how limited, that information sometimes, just reading all these legal documents, about the IEP and stuff like that. And so now, with the, with the service really comprehensively, trying to adopt a teamwork approach, I think it's important, to have people who actually work in the field, to really learn and, to supervise that practice experience. And I do believe that, if there's a balance, with the proportion, I feel comfortable of training, the associate, to have the basic level of the competency, to have a license and be able to continue on.
A great statement, but it didn't actually answer the question that I asked around sort of therapeutic stance orientation and sort of documentation needs that a therapist has to become proficient with.
So when we looked at this before, was it February or November meeting, they put forth some typical programs, LEP degree coursework programs, and they did include theoretical orientation. They did include, they have to do documentation even better than probably my university presents it. It is different. Some of it is different, but the most everything that I was concerned with, like that you were talking about, they definitely demonstrated that in some typical programs. And then I asked around. I have a lot of students who are LEPs who decided to get the LPCC back in the transition day, and they had a lot of coursework that overlapped with ours. And I don't know, Betty, maybe you could speak to that more, but they did have a lot of those clinical pieces, which completely surprised me because I thought it was testing only.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately a real misunderstanding of the role of the school psychologist in general and LEPs in particular. Testing is a component of what we do. Looking at functions of behavior may be a component, but there is also a significant counseling component that addresses much beyond a function of what the behaviors are and looks really much more at just the full range of mental health needs that students have in schools. Students with emotional disabilities, with regulatory issues, with attention deficit issues, with learning disabilities that may be impacting their self-esteem and their ability to engage with peers. Anything that impacts a student's ability to be successful in their school setting to the point that it's impacting their ability to access education is under the scope of our practice. And so I know that there'll be additional commentary from our stakeholders. Look forward to that. But Jonathan, did you have a final? You look like you were going to say something. Okay.
I have several.
Any other comments from the?
Betty?
Oh, I'm sorry.
I said I have several more. I don't have a final comment.
Sorry.
So no, I appreciate sort of support. I mean, helping me better understand the scope. I think I did have a great sense of that. But I guess the piece that I really haven't heard is to what do LEPs bill Medi-Cal? I mean, that's kind of the question I'm asking.
The school districts actually bill Medi-Cal.
So the actual individual licensed educational psychologist who may be providing the supervision does not.
They complete Medi-Cal logs.
So that would be a no. Like they don't do an assessment.
They don't bill directly.
Okay.
Or at least not in the school setting. And I'll let Chris respond to that when he gets up in terms of what we do and what's done in private practice. In a school setting, school districts do in fact bill for those services, and they can bill Medi-Cal if it's a Medi-Cal related service.
Sure. But in terms of the individual, so let's say an AMFT who's working in a private practice setting under another license and is needing to bill Medi-Cal for the service for the ERMS claim, but he's being supervised by an LEP?
I don't
That's
think
not likely
no.
to happen. No, if they're going to have to be in a Medi-Cal environment to be able to bill Medi-Cal, they won't be able to do that.
So they would. So okay, that's helpful to know.
So can I also give feedback? Is that I think the Medi-Cal billing, there are two portions of it. One is about the record keeping. How do you accurately, reflect, the services, right? And then the other the part is really about the billing part, which how many minutes you billed and, and then submit through,
Avatar or whatever.
Right. So I think, the record keeping is definitely a requirement wherever you go.
Sure.
Whether, it's in private practice. I think, the Medi-Cal billing is one standard of how do you do, generate, the income, but at the same time, when we're talking about, how do we train the associates, the record keeping part is actually way more important than, equally important, for keeping your the door open. But at the same time, I think the standard really is about, how do you accurately, keep the records and then be able to, provide the service and that kind of stuff. So I think, again, Medi-Cal is only one standard, and I do believe that, in the school setting, that they may not be submitting the billing, the hour per minute per se,
sure.
But at the same time, I think that's, that's definitely covered.
I think the challenge with that is that any associate who may be temporarily in a school district and then moves to a different setting has the potential to be under-supervised in an area that now they would be required.
But that would be
to maintain
true.
documentation standards.
That would be true in any setting, though, right? Because some agencies are sloppier with documentation than others, but school districts, particularly the public schools, have really strict documentation rules and standards. So regardless of what school they go to, each school, it would be doing it in very, very differently, and all of it has to tie back to the behaviors in the classroom. So there's a slightly different bent on the work in schools that would be different than if a parent just brought their kid to a private practice. Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so thank you. And then my other concern was that I personally feel that 1,200 hours is a significant amount of hours, that it's actually too much. I kind of, in the Policy and Advocacy Committee, sort of offered up another solution based on a formula that's used in terms of managing clinical supervised experience. And so I don't know if there is a opportunity or willingness to sort of look at reducing the number of hours. 1,200 seems to be a significant amount for someone who's not going to actually become an LEP or may not even long-term work in that setting. One of my suggestions was to look, maybe even cut that in half based on the formula that associates who provide or gathering hours typically only get an hour's supervision for every 10 hours of client contact, which is about 40 hours a month. If you multiply that by 12 months, it's about 500 hours. So maybe looking at 500 to 600 hour limit versus the 1,200, that would be a much more, in my opinion, would be a much more fair sort of opportunity for this associate to be supervised in a school setting, but then also get the majority of their hours in another setting that is more sort of in line with their scope, specific scope and practice.
Yeah, I feel torn about this as well. However, I know a lot of our students who go into the schools, that is where they want to make their career, and I would rather them have that larger chunk. Like, they don't have to do 1,200. And we have, I think in LPCC, it's 1,750 total clinical hours. So that still requires over 500 hours in another setting. And nobody's going to hire someone for like 3 months to get those other hours. So likely they're going to go beyond that. But you could also have the reverse, that somebody never works in a school, works at an agency with just adults, and then goes and gets a job in a school district, regardless of license. So, I mean, yeah, it'd be ideal if we could get them across various client types and settings, but I don't think we do that anyway.
What do you mean?
Well, like I said, somebody could go work at an agency that just does adults, right, and then when they get their license, they're going to go work with kids, but they have no clinical experience with kids.
Sure, but they would have been supervised or gotten the majority of their hours in a mental health setting by a BBS licensed staff whose scope of practice is more aligned with maybe that particular license type. That's what I'm saying. So they've been supervised. Yeah. They've gotten their hours. They understand documentation. Let's just say ideally. They understand documentation. So going to work with kids might be a shift in, okay, how do I engage in developmentally appropriate interventions? How do I pull in the family and work on resilience work and things of that nature? So it's less of a leap.
I see what you're saying. I think LEPs do more similar work to our field than I realized before we started this conversation and the research that I've done in the last 6 months about it. I think there's a lot more overlap than we know. I think of it as more like how clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists are fairly similar, one being more humanistic, developmentally, and then the other being more assessment and diagnosis heavy, and it's just a slightly heavier assessment and diagnosis piece than our field, and we get slightly more relational, interpersonal stuff, but they still get it, and we still do a little bit of assessment. I think it's a matter of degrees. At least I've spoken with at least 15 different school psychologists who are doing the work. Sure. Yeah.
I don't want to dominate. I don't want to dominate the discussion, but I just want to throw it out there too that currently I'm also supervising the MFT associates, and so what I find also is that there's definitely theoretical difference, between the discipline. But when we're talking about, that associate already got their educational background, and it really is a matter of like training in the field, to get those practical experience. And then to me, it's like, I always learn from different people. And so I think, that, I feel comfortable that, within their 2,000 to 2,500 hours, that only that portion, can be only supervised by LEP, then I think, that can, and like Leah say, it is the maximum. And so I think, when we look at, the possibility of actually widening, the knowledge and the skill, for the associates, for what the LEP, bring in, I think that is a beautiful thing. And for two, it's like, I think the school counselor right now, I mean, I'm talking about the therapists in the school setting, they are a very specific population. They love working with kids. They have to love working with kids and the parents, and a lot of them are very dedicated. And so, normally, you see them, stay in, working for that particular population for, for many years. And so I think, when we look at, the licensing process really is, giving them, to build their fundamental, competency and then be able for them to move on and continue to expand and stuff. I think that is, 1,200 hours is, it's acceptable to me.
And I would just say one more thing on that, and I appreciate Leah saying it too. I believe that there is a lot more to the need and the scope of practice for all of our professions in terms of working with students 3 to 20, 22, whatever. Then we understand that that's a huge portion of actually going forward the profession. If someone knows that they're not going to work with students, they're not going to work with kids, that's not what they want to do. They want to do families, they want to do adults. They're not going to be drawn to that. It's going to appeal to people who want to do that as a profession. And I do appreciate both Christine and Leah's comments that this gives them a broader scope of practice for that portion of what they're choosing to do. Jonathan, did you have more, or you had some more comments? I didn't see any. Oh, Gabriel, thank you.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if we need to bring into the discussion. If an associate is willing to take their hours at a school setting and having them be supervised by an LEP, do we need to make it a requirement for the associate to also go for their PPS credentials?
That's an entirely different job. It's a school administrative job. But one thing that might cause comfort that you just brought up for me is with the new supervision bill and the supervision language and requirements about what they have to look at and how they have to supervise and how they have to document all of that, that also gives me reassurance that they're getting what they need within their scope of practice. Because they have to be talking about theory and countertransference and cultural and diversity issues. So that supervision law would lay, I don't know, are LEPs listed in that law right now? So we would have to add them.
They would be added.
Yeah.
They would be added, and they would be subject to the same requirements as the other professions.
So that's really helpful because when we built that to make sure that they were getting supervised properly.
So I have a couple more thoughts.
Jonathan?
So one of the other things, so while I appreciate my fellow board members' ideas, I don't agree. I still see it very differently. And I just see it differently. So one of the other things I noticed that in the licensing process, LEPs don't have to take a law and ethics clinical exam. You mentioned they have to take continuing education classes, and everyone else does. And I'm wondering, is that something, excuse me?
It's in their exam.
It's in their exam?
Yes, and that's the way it used to be for the other exams. We used to do just a clinical exam And then when we transitioned under the exam restructure, that's when we broke stuff out.
Sure. Is there a rationale why that one wasn't broken out also? Because I guess, like I mentioned, we're not just looking at the environment and the health outcomes of the clients, which are very important, but we're also looking at the developing therapists and to what extent an LEP could actually support sort of the promotion of law and ethics consistency into the other license types when their sort of process is a little different. So I don't know if that's something that's considered.
They don't register as associates, so the point of breaking out the law and ethics exam was to have the associates taking law and ethics exam while they're practicing when they're just out of school. LEP is going to go through a different practice. They have to get a credential, and they're working under a different system, and then they decide to become an LEP later. So it's not quite the same process there, which is why the law and ethics exam wasn't broken out for them.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Can we move to public?
I do want to point out, too, since the discussion's kind of moving along, I want to point out, again, the supplemental documents, the exact language that we're going to, at the end of this discussion, have to come to when we're looking at the two supplemental items vary a little bit. The one that's in your packet as supplemental materials, CAS proposed amendments, states that an LEP may only supervise the provision of educationally related mental health services and other services that are consistent with the scope of practice of an educational psychologist. And then it refers back to the scope. So my question would be, in the proposed language, do we want the allowance to be for ERMs and the scope of practice, or for just ERMs? So the two different choices you have in the supplements.
Where are you, Roseanne?
I'm on the supplemental materials for the CAS proposed amendments in your packet.
There's two. There's one that she handed out
And
the email
one. That
and
one
that's
is
not
just
what we're looking at,
ERMs.
no.
This one, the other one that's in your packet is ERMs plus the scope of practice.
I would say plus the scope of practice, because you shouldn't be supervising somebody beyond your scope of practice.
Okay. So it would be kind of, it's the way that it's written, it would be it's ERMs and anything in your scope of practice, or is it ERMs as long as it's in the scope of practice? Because the way that it's written now, it's kind of, it says they can supervise ERMs and other services that are consistent with the scope of practice.
So,
and, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. So I'm wondering, and Betty mentioned a phrase that kind of caught my eye and ear, was services that are necessary for students to access their education. So I'm wondering if we weave that statement into the language and then make a reference back to the code section for LEPs that talk about their scope of practice. Something about, as provided for in, and it would be BMP 4989.14. I don't know how that, you're the guru on the language, but.
I mean, clearly we don't want anyone practicing
out of scope. No, I don't want that. But
I believe that the changes that we've been making have been an attempt to address some of the concerns. And I think that there was a concern that perhaps by not referring to ERMs and just talking about our scope of practice, that it might be overly broad in terms of what we're really requesting or suggesting. And so I think it was, to some extent, a compromise to try and really clarify and narrow what it was that we were requesting. So I think that's where we landed, was to talk about ERMs, and certainly consistent with our scope of practice, and however you want to wordsmith that.
Right. So right now, if you're looking at the supplemental materials, we have to basically have hammered out exactly what we want. The way this bill is that the amendments are not in the bill yet. So if we're going to do, let's just say, we're not deciding anything yet, but if the board wanted to do a support if amended position, the language would need to say the exact amendments that the board wants. So what we need to do is can come up with the exact language that we would want if we were to take that, if we want to take that kind of a position. So in looking at the supplemental materials, which is what CASP is proposing, it says that the educational psychologist may only supervise the provision of educationally related mental health services and other services. And I think the "and other services" is the key word. What does that mean? Does that appears to mean you can supervise ERMs and also anything else that's in your scope of practice? Or do you want it to say something more, is it more appropriate to say something like supervise the provision of educationally related mental health services and take out the "and other services" and then just say that are consistent with the scope of practice? There's a key difference there.
Or that are within the scope of practice.
Right.
Could you give so what's an example of other related services? Would that be like
there's
supervising like to music therapy? If the
there's
child was getting
a
music
scope
therapy?
of practice in attachment D in your packet. It's 4989.14.
Right.
And that is the actual LEP scope of practice. So it's not a definition of ERMs. It's just anything that's in the LEP. That is what LEPs are permitted to do. So, and maybe that's fine. Maybe that's what we want, but that's where the discussion needs to lie, because we're talking sort of about two different things. We're talking kind of centering the discussion on ERMs, but the scope, but it also throws the scope of practice in there, and that's a little bit broader than just ERMs. So I want to make sure that what we're agreeing on is what everybody understands what they're agreeing on, if that makes sense.
So, Roseanne, if we took out that phrase "and other services" and then simply went on to say that are consistent within the scope of practice, does that get where we want to?
I'm not sure where we want to go, but that narrows it to just ERMs as defined in this paragraph.
Okay.
Whereas the saying "and other services" points you back to anything that falls under 4989.14.
Do you think you had the "and other services" because it was part of the other language to talk about speech therapists and other types of professions? No, that wasn't pulled from there?
No, I think that perhaps the original intent was, in fact, to have it extend beyond ERMs. And my sense was that at the Policy and Advocacy Committee and hearing from other stakeholders, that there was an interest in narrowing perhaps that definition. So I would like to, if it would be all right with the board, I would like to open it up to the other stakeholders and see if we can get some input from the public.
Rebecca Gonzalez, National Association of Social Workers. We are supportive of this bill. We consulted with our school social workers to see what they thought, and they said what Leah said, that it is another opportunity for them to gain hours, which is valuable to them. We don't believe that the bill only, I'm looking at Roseanne now, only applies to our associates and not to our interns, our graduate students, which wouldn't work for us because our graduates have to get their supervision from social workers, LCSWs. We were looking at the bill as we were sitting here, and at the top of page 17, line 1, we just wanted to make sure that there wasn't, that we didn't need an amendment there because it does say social work intern. But looking at it really quickly, I'm not really sure if that's, let's see, I'm going to go to it too. Page 17 of the bill,
So
line 1.
That's talking about the requirement for a supervisor, any supervisor, to have supervised for 2 years,
Right.
Or practice psychotherapy within the 5-year period, and that language that you're seeing about the social work intern is from AB 93. We added
Right.
that last year, where we said, if you've been to qualify for the 2 of the past 5 years, okay, it's got to be an associate, but if it's been an intern or a trainee, you can count that too, as long as it's substantially equivalent to the type of supervision you would provide an associate. So it doesn't really affect anything here. It's just how they qualify to be a supervisor.
Right.
We're amending the definition. We're amending, if the bill proposes amending LEPs into the definition of what a supervisor actually is. So all of this would apply because it applies to all supervisors. So you don't.
Okay.
It's not a concern.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, but we are supportive.
Kathy Atkins, California Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. I have comments and then actually some questions. So generally speaking, this is the type of bill that CAMPT would be in support of. Any bill that we believe adds additional resources and mental health resources to a school district, we absolutely advocate for and feel strongly about. I think, as Leah said, we need a lot more resources there, and I'm hoping that things like AB 8 will help that. Certainly any bill that would add supervision abilities for our members we're in support of. And where we are today, we reached out to quite a few of our members who work in the K through 12 system and asked, what kind of services are they doing? Where would the LEP come in? And I'll be frank, we're getting a lot of concerns given back to us. Unlike what I've observed with mental health, be it at agencies or private practice, the districts, and I've mentioned this to Chris, who will be speaking in a minute, as well as Kim and Roseanne, the districts are very different on how they implement their services, how LEPs are used, how associates are used, and every time we sort of got a handle on how this would transpire and how this would work, we would talk to someone, and it just threw everything up in the air. Of our understanding on whether this is a bill we want to support or oppose. Ultimately, while our charge isn't consumer protection, that is where our main concern comes in. Part of it is the number of hours that is dedicated here, 1,200. So to Jonathan's point, we do have some concerns about the hours being, whether our associates and trainees are going to be developed in a way that we think is beneficial to them and also provides consumer protection. But where our main concern lies is what supervision availability and competence is there if a associate or trainee no longer has to go outside to get that clinical supervision, again, depending on the district and how they're implementing the IEP and services and how the associate or trainees are being used. So Chris and the LEPs and have been great. They've been very thoughtful and open to us, working with us to help us understand, working with us, asking ways, how can we work together so we can ultimately support this bill, which we would like to do. But at this time, we do have concerns about the language, how this could affect consumer protection for children. And so we have not officially taken a position, but we do have remaining concerns. And I also, I've said this before, but I do worry with legislation when you rush it, especially something like this, you can do it wrong. And I think it's better to be thoughtful and timely. And if it takes a little bit longer to get it right, I think that's the avenue a consumer protection agency should take. I have no idea what the board is talking about, which language, because there's what was in the packet, and I heard Roseanne say a couple things. So I'm actually really confused as to which language you're all actually voting on.
That's what we have to come up with, because there isn't a concrete proposal. The CAS proposed amendments includes the other services, which appears to bring in the scope. This is just language where I took that out, and then we can drop the definition of ERMS that came up within there. So we kind of have to have that discussion still.
Okay. So I know CASP has some ideas, and I know they're going to be speaking in a second. But again, I have concerns about the board making on-the-fly decisions about what this language will be that will be implemented long-term and how it affects the K through 12 population. Thank you.
Just checking my watch before I say good morning. It is still morning. So appreciate the opportunity and also the thoughtful discussion on this topic. My name is Wendell Callahan. As I was sitting there, I looked up when my license was first issued as an LAP, and it was in 1993. So I've been licensed for 26 years as an LAP. Just for transparency's sake, I'm a member of CASP's LAP committee. Obviously, I have a strong interest in this in a personal, professional manner to see the LAPs being able to provide this level of supervision. In my professional career, I've been a school psychologist for a number of years, and I was a district administrator that oversaw student services, including supervision of interns, school nursing, school psychology. And to answer your concern about record keeping, what we did when I worked for the County Board of Ed is most school information systems now have a module that's HIPAA compliant. And so we were basically able to turn that on to provide a space for progress notes and medical records. And so that's not a huge issue. And if a district doesn't have that capacity, that's probably more of a consumer protection issue than what we're discussing today. The other hat I wear is I'm a counselor educator. So I'm a faculty member at the University of San Diego in the Department of Counseling and Marital and Family Therapy. We have 3 programs, one in school counseling, one in that leads to the LPCC in clinical mental health counseling, and then we also have an MFT program. We have a concentration that sort of lives between the school counseling program and the LPC program in school-based mental health. And so we have some students that do both their PPS and their LPC, and we have MFTs and LPCs that just concentrate in that area. So my other role in the program is I'm Director of Clinical Training. So there's a workforce development aspect to this that that's near and dear to my heart, and that is making sure my graduates have jobs, right? And so what I've found, some of the best placements for our students and for our associates once they graduate is doing ERMs. School districts tend to be generous employers. The compensation packages are generous. They still have pensions, things like that. So I actively seek out these placements, and given my experience in the districts, I've created some of these types of placements. And our students, by and large, I think Leah brought this up, there's not a lot of them. I wouldn't say it's the majority of our students, but the folks that are drawn this way, they seek to do this as a career. So I've not seen students sort of do their practicum level work and then their associate level work and then walk away from this. They're going into this because that's where they want to end up. Finally, the role of the LAP is unique in this system, and somebody sort of alluded to this, and I think they really do provide that connective tissue between the mental health world and ERMS as it's implemented in the K-12 educational setting. And as you know, there's a huge need for mental health services in K-12, and it is a system need, but more importantly, it's a student need, right? And I just want to applaud the board for taking this matter up so seriously, because I think I've seen it. I mean, I've done it. I've set up these programs and supervised ERMs, both at the day treatment level and the outpatient level, and they make a huge positive difference. And so the degree to which the board can facilitate more access to that service professionally for our students and associates, and also for students in K-12, I just think it's a win-win. So, thank you. And question?
Yes, Mr. Callahan, thanks for coming today. What is your experience? Because I know with respect to the hours, the number of hours.
Oh, I wanted to circle back.
Yeah, I'm since you have firsthand knowledge, I'm wondering, is 1,200 too much, too little?
So I was doing the math on that, and 1,200 to me seems about right, and I'll tell you why. That more or less equates to a school year, an academic year, for services that would be about 20 to 25 hours of clinical contact, right? So one, as a counselor educator, and I really appreciate Jonathan's comments about the development of the sort of what we call self of the therapist or self of the counselor. I look for placements that are a year long, that are an academic year, for that exact reason, so they can develop a sense of their sort of therapeutic stance. As an employer, right, as a district employer, I'm just not going to hire a counselor that can't commit to more than academic year. I mean, that's disruptive to most importantly to the student, because one interesting thing about ERMs is typically that's long term, right? So those IEPs are written year to year. So if we were able to place an associate providing ERMs under an LEP, that the associates are going to see those students for an entire academic year, right? And so 1,200 hours is almost a perfect fit for that. And again, just logistically on the side of the district, it would just be very disruptive to have, students or associates rotating into that kind of an activity.
I'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Sure.
Tell me your name again, sir.
Dr. Wendell Callahan.
Dr. Callahan, thank you very much. So I definitely appreciate sort of your experience and what you're bringing to the table. That's really helped sort of broaden my understanding, and I greatly appreciate that. So I have had conversations with several people near where I work in terms of, and it's been my own experience too, that most high schools have one, maybe two educational psychologists on site to cover all of the students who would be receiving testing needs, ERM services, and things of that nature. So as you could greatly imagine, they're pulled here, there, and everywhere. And so one of the things that we did, and I'm not advocating for this, this was just my experience, is that I frequently utilized the school psychologists when they were available for consultation, because that was a key part of me understanding sort of the educational aspects of the testing and the IEP documents that I am not familiar with nor fall within my scope. So that was a useful activity for me. But going back to your point, so if we're looking at, which I greatly appreciate you clarifying, if we're looking at an actual school year, a school year is 9 months. And within that 9 months, registrants or associates can only get qualified supervision hours. They get 1 hour for every 10 hours of client contact. So based on what you were describing, 20 to 25 hours, they would either need 2 hours of individual supervision or 4 hours of group supervision during any particular week in order to claim 20 hours, which still only gets us to 720 hours for the academic school year. So 1,200 far exceeds what you're actually describing and advocating for. I would also add that because most school psychologists or most schools have a limited number of psychologists, I don't know where they'd find another hour to supervise. Now, I don't know every school, I don't know every situation, so I will admit that. But typically, your associates are going to get 1 hour of supervision a week. So that means they can only count 40 hours a month, 9 months a year, which gets us back to about 360. And so that's why I advocated for the number closer to 500 to 600, because I think it falls closer in line to what you're even describing yourself, one academic school year, and not 1,200, which, in my opinion, and with the support of CAMP, is also seems to be exorbitant. So that's my comment.
Would you like a response?
Yeah.
So not to pick nits, but so ERMs typically the students that are receiving that are eligible for an extended school year. So they'd be receiving that service throughout the summer as well. So it's the academic year plus usually 2 additional months.
Okay.
I can tell you the way I did supervision. And so we did 1 to 2 hours of individual supervision a week plus an hour of group supervision. We can't.
But not to cut you off, but you are aware that an hour of group supervision means nothing toward an hour. You have to have 2 hours of group supervision for it to count.
Right,
Okay.
but it was important to provide that.
No, I agree.
Clinically.
I agree. But when
So my point is, and somebody brought this up, the school site can work out the supervision arrangement to meet whatever requirements we put in front of them. Believe me, if this were available when I was supervising this activity, I would make sure the supervision requirement met whatever you all said. And the reason being is you brought up a good point. I was a high school psychologist for many years at a campus of 3,800 students. And I oversaw an ERMS day treatment program on site. And so I didn't do that all by myself, right? I had a team that I worked with. And so if that team could have included an associate, I would have made whatever allowances that were required of me to make sure that supervision happened in compliance with this regulation.
No, I appreciate that, and I appreciate your flexibility in terms of applying that, but I think the reality is in most school districts, with the pressure and the number of students and the students who are being advanced for ERM services, being assessed for ERM services, and receiving ERM services, the reality is very different, and a lot of school psychologists on campus are really overwhelmed, and I just think personally, and I'll reiterate, not knowing all circumstances everywhere, I think it sounds like it would be really tough to advance more hours of supervision. So that's why I continue to advocate for a much lower number. But I definitely appreciate your experience and what you would do if you were there.
Well, and I think we have somebody following me that can speak probably more directly to that issue. And I'm sure Cass would advocate on this issue. So if there's not any other questions, I'll yield to Chris.
Thank you very much.
Good morning. I feel like a regular at these meetings. Chris Jones with CASP. I've been up here 10 or 1,200 times. Are there specific questions that you might have to clarify anything before I kind of get to the statement that I have?
So, Chris, one of the things that occurred to me that may be a response or not usually lacking in vocal output here. One of the things that occurs to me, and I'd like you to perhaps chime in on, is Jonathan's accurate perception that school psychologists and LEPs on the school sites certainly have a lot to do and very busy schedules. But what occurs to me, and I think in the conversations that I've been having with our school psychologists and our local LEPs, is that if we were able to supervise ASWs and other license associates, it would be an increase in our role that would actually how can I say this? So it could be a rationale for increasing time for a school psychologist because it would increase their role and their capacity to serve more students more effectively. So I'm trying to say it would be an amazing use of resources that are already in place. And I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Absolutely. Education is changing dramatically. The need for mental health services within schools has increased tenfold in the last 5 to 10 years. Psychologists are, by definition, the most flexible people that they have working in the schools. We have to put 10 different hats on per day. And to Mr. Maddox's point, in the traditional thought process of how school psychs work, we test and we don't do a whole lot else. But that's not the case anymore. The trend is changing. And in your model, where we have school psychs who are testing and counseling, it would be almost impossible to provide appropriate supervision for associates. You're correct. But within my organization, within the trend of education, within the schools now with AB 114 having to develop ERMS programs, the model is shifting. And psychologists are being hired or transferred over specifically to ERMS programs where they are only doing counseling all day long and they're not testing anymore because their needs are here. And so we're trying to make a shift. Also, within the last 10 years, there's been a move, actually it's 15, there's been a move away from traditional assessment with the implementation of RTI. Anyone know more acronyms for you guys? Response intervention and what we call a multi-tiered system of support, MTSS, is that we're trying to move away from that test and assess, put a kid in special ed model. Instead, we're looking at doing different interventions instead as a way of identifying kids that have special needs. So in the traditional model, yeah, it's not going to work. But that traditional model is changing, and I think that schools are trying to develop more comprehensive mental health programs for kids. And as a result, school psychologists are becoming involved in those programs and doing it full-time. 100% of their hours are spent with counseling. LEPs who are in those positions are well suited to provide supervision to those associates. And I think, to Betty's point, if this were to pass through, then it would open up doors for schools to go, hey, we've got resources now that we can add in that we weren't able to add in before, which I think is very important. With regards to the language, and as we're trying to kind of figure things out, as Betty talked about earlier, I think simple is the best. So if it's simply putting in that, you know, the definition of ERMS is educationally related mental health services, so students with disabilities can access their educational programs, we're okay with that. I think that that works. We want to make it as clear and clean as possible to make sure that the scope and the intent is what it's supposed to be. Final comment from me, unless there's other questions. Mr. Maddox, I don't know if you recall or not, but at our Policy and Advocacy Committee, you made a very important analogy or metaphor. You compared the other licensees and the LEPs to apples and oranges, how all the other three were apples and LEPs were oranges. We're a very important orange, but we're still oranges. You recall? Right? You recall? Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, going through this process, it's pretty tough being an orange in your apple orchard. Yeah, it's pretty tough. I would like to think that we have a lot of overlap and that we can support one another as we are protecting our consumers and providing services. But here's why this bill is so very important. Your apples are now in my orange grove, and you are asking apples to teach apples to be oranges when the oranges are sitting right there in front of you. So I want you to kind of think about that a little bit and understand that we're all working towards the same goal. And I think that, you know, as Leah talked about, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what our training is. And within the last 10 years, we've moved so far away from testing and are focusing so much more on mental health intervention services, counseling, all of it, that we are right there and open, available, and willing to work with your associates to make sure that they are providing the best services possible for our students.
Thank you.
Chris, before you go.
Sure.
1,200 hours.
1,200 hours. Dr. Callahan he's right. The school district's not going to hire someone for 400 hours a week. And to your point with your math, if you have an LEP psychologist, educational psychologist, that is full-time working in an ERMS program, or even 90%, 4 days a week, 80%, they're going to have the time and they're going to build it because we're going to build that program. We are going to make the shift. We are going to change how things are done because that's what we do as educational psychologists. I think that's why no one understands what we do, is because it changes every single day. Every single day. But yeah, 1,200 hours and that's why we talked about it before. That's a school year, and that is time for students to get to know their clients. If you were to remove an associate partway through the year because they'd maxed out their hours, I would be very concerned as to how that would affect the therapeutic relationship with the student.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. That's helpful.
And I do want to say it's up to 1,200 hours.
Right. Yes.
Up to 1,200 hours. Yes. It may not be, but I think what you've suggested is that would be reasonable in terms of marketability and availability and student support.
And one of the reasons, I mean, you guys are correct. You're only going into school if you want to work in a school. But there's also those associates that they don't have a lot of opportunities to work with kids. And schools offer them that unique opportunity. And if they haven't had all of the training, you know, to Leah's point, in that one class of child development versus LEPs that have been steeped in that for their career, I think it becomes you know, an important piece because we've got that intimate knowledge of how kids and families work.
Sure. Can I ask you a question? Because I know both you and the previous doctor have sort of said that 1,200 works great because it covers the school year. But I actually offered you a sort of equation that got me to the number I have. What process or sort of equation are you using to say, okay, 1,200 is great? Because from what I've described, this 720 is probably about the max, even if you extend it into 11 months. So, like, what are you using to get that?
If I may.
Because everybody's saying it's great, but I don't know what the backdrop for that is.
So, if I recall correctly, there were 2 associates we denied hours.
Yes.
Do you know the totals for both of those associates?
Those were Dr. Callahan's associates.
Yes.
I don't know, do you know the hours?
Do you recall the hours? Yes. 1,500 hours for both of them.
But that was one unique setting, so that still doesn't speak to the majority of students
Right.
who are in 9-month programs. And some may or may not go to summer school. Some of them may just continue on and on. So hold on, I'm not done. So while I appreciate outliers, they are that. They're outliers. So back to my question, like what sort of, like how are you getting to this number? Because I'm not clear on how that's happening.
Typical school day will go 6 hours.
Okay.
Right. Within those 6 hours, if you are seeing clients the majority of the day, you're going to get, say, maybe 5 to 6 hours on some days. Other days it might be, you know, if there's an assembly or field trip or something like that that would impact it, but about that. So then you have to add in your time for the supervision that you would get over the course of the year. So there's 180 days in a school year. Sure. It's not based on number of months. 9 months. There's not schools that go 9 months anymore. We know there's no such thing as a 3-month summer, just on TV shows. So, doing that math, 6 times 180. I don't have my calculator with me, but it's an educational model that we've used for years.
So I'm not understanding your equation because if you say 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, that's 30 hours.
30 hours.
And that's a lot of clients for some, I mean, I don't know anywhere else where people have caseloads, therapists that have caseloads that high, but I know there are. So based on your model, you'd have to, no, well, VA is not the school district. With that model, you'd have to have 3 hours of supervision a week.
Right.
To be able to count those hours. And so in my experience, that is sort of very rare. That anybody anywhere gets 3 hours.
But when we're building programs, when we're building ERMS programs, because remember, schools now have to provide those services, and we understand that if to use associates, we have to follow the rules that BBS is set up to do that. Sure. So that's how programs are being developed. So in a school district that has an ERMS program set up, they're going to have the number of hours that you're going to see kids versus the number of hours that you're going to have supervision over the course of the week, because they have to build it that way in order for the supervision to work. The associate has to get benefit from the experience, and they can't do that if we're not following the guidelines.
Thank you. I mean, I don't have any more comments based on what you said. I appreciate it. I know this is becoming a fatiguing conversation, and we're at sort of an impasse. I know one of the things that Camp mentioned earlier was that this process appears to be moving rather quickly without some significant consideration. Huh? No, I'm sorry. I was just saying, I know the conversation is becoming fatiguing, and I'm not sure if other people want to share. We have other board business, but it seems like, and I would align with Camp, that this is moving quickly without sort of considering some of the nuances of how to make this a useful amendment if we're going to move in this direction. So I don't know what the next step for that would be, but it clearly is.
I think we had Christine Witless Bach and then Christina Wong.
I just wanted to make the brief comment that, as Betty said, it's up to, what'd you say, 1,200 hours, and they've explained that they will adjust how they provide supervision to meet the requirements. So there are outliers, and those people have more hours than that, but that's why it's up to.
Sure.
So.
But Christian, you have to acknowledge she's not a representative from every school district, and school districts can implement locally the way they want. So what Chris is sharing today may be true, but some school districts may say, we're not doing that, and then we're left with another model. So I think we have to sort of consider
But they'll be
that.
required to implement the supervision based on, there going to be regulations or a statute? I don't know what it is. But,
It'll be, the requirement is an hour of supervision for a week for the first 10, and then another hour of individual supervision for anything over 10. So if they have to give out 2 hours of supervision a week, then they either do it or the associate can't count the hours.
Right. So that's therefore up to, depending on how they do it.
Christina Wong. And then Gabriel.
Very quickly, so I want to appreciate, the collaborative efforts of CASP, and all the stakeholders for this process. I mean, this has been going on for a very long time. And also, I just want to remind the board members that this is a bill that we're not sponsoring. We're actually getting input. So, I mean, there is always a choice that, you like it or not. The bill is going to go past the, you're not getting the board's, opinion. And so, so I think it's important that, that we, I think that, exchange is important, but at the same time, I think, the time is also, the clock is clicking because of the legislative process. So.
Thank you. And
You're welcome.
I think, Gabriel, you had a comment.
I just wanted to comment. I am in agreement for LEPs. I am in agreement for LEPs to be able to supervise students. Associates. However, with what Jonathan was saying, I'm not sure that there's any guarantee that a lot of these associates are just going to be signed off. And I don't know that we can even control that. I just think that it's important for it to be considered that maybe a school district is going to be a little bit more sloppy and they're just going to be signing off associates. That's my concern.
Respond. That particular concern, Gabriel, is one of the reasons we put forth the changes we did in the supervision bill. I can tell you right now, I still see hours, they're just signed off. I've had 2 people this last week who associates who have pleaded their case for their 1,000 hours to count because they were earned while their registration was lapsed. The supervisor should have known that, but didn't, and they signed off on the hours anyway. So we're hopeful, and I anticipate with the changes in the supervision bill, I'm going to see less of that. And I don't know that we are able to ever make it 100% accurate that the hours that come into us are appropriately earned under the settings, under the ratios that we have set forth. I mean, there's a lot of trust out there, but I think the tighter regulations we have now with the supervision bill is going to minimize that.
And it wouldn't be any different.
And it's not going to be any different for LEPs, and I feel bad, but fundamentally the law says get those hours while your registration is valid. That's extremely clear, but it's still occurring.
And also, I'd add on to what Kim said, that the supervisor, when they agree to supervisor, they're still, if it were to be an LEP, they're still licensed by us, so they're signing on their license that they have completed this supervision. So they're ultimately accountable, and it's on their license, on behalf of their license, that they have done that. I don't know that we can say, I mean, there's all kinds of agencies that people supervise in. I don't know that we have any data, or there's no way we can say that schools aren't going to pay more attention to the agency. It's up to the individual supervisor. They're accountable, and they're betting their license on it, basically.
And I guess I like to think that LEPs are just as ethical and just as responsible as any of our other licensees. I certainly personally have a strong ethical foundation. I don't know very many LEPs that don't. So is it possible that there's an unethical practice? I mean, that's true for any of the professions, and I don't think it's unique in this particular situation. I think I would like to have us come up, I think we did come up with language. I appreciate Christine saying, I guess I don't personally feel like we've really rushed this through. I feel like we've had, quite a bit of thoughtful conversation on this. I see other board members nodding their heads. So I would like us to go ahead and get the language, get it clarified, and take a vote to either support or oppose or whatever.
So the amendment that would be, I mean, the bill as is, we're working on amendments, so it would need to be, if it was some type of a support position that you wanted to go in that direction, it would need to be a support if amended with the exact language you would want. So they would need to make those exact amendments to earn the board's support, basically, because there's nothing in bill form right now that includes the description of what setting it needs to be.
So I think we've all heard language that we agreed to. And, I mean, can you go ahead and clarify that?
So if you look at the supplemental materials in your packet, it's titled Supplemental Materials Cast Proposed Amendments at the top. It's that one. It should be in the binder, yes.
It was the emailed attachment.
Oh, it was in the email attachment. Okay.
Supplemental material.
You have it? Okay. So looking at that page, and we'll just use the MFT. We won't go through all four of them because they're identical, but we'll just use the MFT sections that are in question as an example. So that is the first, those are on page 1, going a little bit onto page 2, 4980.03G and 4980.43C9. So looking at those amendments, I would ask you to consider, if you see the under 4980.43G, you see a sentence that's got some underlined text. That's the start of the amendment that would go into the bill. Where it says a licensed educational psychologist may only supervise the provision of educationally related mental health services and other services that are consistent with the scope of practice of an educational psychologist as defined in BPC section 4989.14. Are you comfortable with that language, or do you want to make any modifications to that language?
Can you clarify, because I've never really heard a clarification of what "and other services" means. Like, what does that concretely mean?
And other services that are consistent with the scope of practice of an educational psychologist. So those other services would be anything that are defined in the scope.
And Roseanne, I think what we have talked about and what we kind of feel more comfortable with in terms of addressing the concerns is taking out that language that says "and other related services." So just leaving the provision of educationally related mental health services that are consistent with the scope of practice of an educational psychologist. And that would be the recommendation that I would have for the exact language that we need.
Okay, and then it'll go on for the definition. And then we need to do the same thing in 4980.43C9. And that's down at the bottom of the page. What I would recommend is that it be changed to say a maximum of 1,200 hours gained under the supervision of a licensed educational psychologist. And then I would, hold on.
Stop after providing educationally related mental health services, period.
As defined in subdivision G of section 4980.43.
Yep.
And to do that in all three.
And to do that in all of the licenses.
Yes. So moved.
And I guess I just reiterate my opposition to the 1,200 hours, just so that it's noted. I still think that that's excessive and not based on any sort of formula that makes sense to me.
Okay, we have a motion and a second public comment. Jan Lee.
Yeah, I don't want to throw a monkey wrench into the process here, but I want to make sure you understand, which I know you all do, that social work is a different profession than marriage family therapy. So actually, if you bear with me, a quick sort of explanation is that social work uses something called the advanced generalist model in their graduate education. It's not a specialist model, it's advanced generalist, which means that post-graduation, after they get their MSW, they specialize. So for those social workers who want to go into school social work, who want to work in schools, they will be getting their specialization from the schools. So that means if they're supervised by an LEP, they will be learning the job they have to do in the district, and this fits the many, many different district ways of doing things. It really does fit it. So their idea is by specializing in that particular district, they hope to get a job in the school district, and it only makes sense. You're learning from the LEP and the other professional staff at that school district basically how to do the work there and hopefully get a job. So we don't necessarily want to be lumped in with 4980. I think for 4996 it's okay to include this language because a social worker will want to know the entire scope of what's going on in the district. The other thing is by deleting this for social workers, it may make it harder for them actually to get a job because they won't be exposed as much to the other services being provided in that district. So I think it's okay. We support this bill. We talk to our school social workers, and I really do think it's okay for us to be treated differently than marriage family therapists.
Wait, don't run away. I think other people are as confused as me.
I am.
Confusing you?
Yeah.
You want to put the
Well,
other services back in.
Because you have different statutory sections here. You have 4980 and you have 4996.
Right.
4980 is for MFTs.
4996
is for social workers.
So what you're proposing
is don't delete those sections.
And other services.
For social workers.
For social
4996. Does that make sense, Roseanne?
So keep the and other services for social workers,
Right.
take them out for LPCs and LMFTs.
Right.
Okay.
Would
Do we
the
wanna
board be-
discuss that?
Because
Why
they
is
do
that?
other
I
social
thought I
work
explained it.
related stuff that's different than what MFTs and LPCCs would do.
But that's talking about, what the
talking about the scope of-
the license
Supervisors.
the educational, psychologist being the supervisor
Yeah, for social workers.
for social work.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Which
but-
we think is okay. Did I say something different than that?
I think the
No, I agree. No. But but that's referring to the 1,200 hours, within that scope, right? And the
Right.
social workers can still have another
1,800 hours.
1,800 hours to get there.
That's another difference between the professions, which
Right.
really fits social work. It really does.
Right, it fits. So that's what I'm thinking that, that particular section really just referred to the LEP supervisors, to supervise that specialty.
In particular, social workers.
Right, but at the same time, when we, at the end, the other services, we are allowing the LEP supervisors to, to do more other than that.
Yeah.
Other
So
than the ERMs.
I'll leave it to Roseanne to figure out what section of the code affects MFT hours versus social work hours.
I think I get it. So what we are saying that this language, the provision of education, mental health services that are consistent with the scope of practice, we're going to take out and other services for
Right.
marriage family therapists, for LPCCs, but that the social workers would like the language back in on their section and other services.
So the,
No, that's
the
not what
LEP.
Christina is
That's
saying.
not what Christina's saying.
No,
I think,
Okay.
But
see,
that's what I'm
unfortunately,
saying.
That's what
That's
he's
what
saying.
I'm saying.
But that's not what
Because that section only referred to the supervision. And so if you want to be consistent with what we talked about, that the LEP supervisor can only supervise ERM service, then you need to take out and the other services so that, it's limited that scope for the LEP supervisor to be able to just supervise the ERMs.
Okay. And that would be consistent with all the licenses?
Yes. That's why, Jenny, I'm not sure, which section that, you're referring to.
Well, I'm
hoping
hoping that we can make a difference here. So however it's worked out.
Well, but I'm not sure you're saying that you want to leave the other services, and so basically an LEP, if I'm an LEP supervisor and I'm supervising an MFT, an AMFT and an ASW, I can supervise, the MFT is allowed to do, I can supervise them doing
just for ERMs.
But I can supervise the social work doing it in the entire scope of practice of an LEP.
Exactly.
How does the board feel about that?
Why do we all have to be the same?
I'm not clear.
I'm not clear.
Well, it's not about being the same or not being the same. What is it that the social work ASW would be prevented from doing if we take out and other services?
Well, why would you take it out then?
Because we don't want them doing anything outside the scope of the LEP under the LEP's supervision.
But the way I read this is it's consistent with their scope.
Leah, I think it's consistent with their scope, but I think the concern for MFTs and possibly LPCCs was that LEPs do in fact do things other than educationally related mental health services. 99% of what they do in the school setting is probably ERMs. But this would allow them to see students that were not on IEPs. And I think that was some of the concern that we got back from the other professions, was that if we limit it to ERMs, they would feel more secure or more confident that it wasn't going beyond what they felt comfortable with.
Because we did not want associates who were not providing ERM services to seek supervision hours from an LEP. We wanted to limit it to those
to ERMs. Yes. So doing a student who happens to not be ERMs providing whatever services to them that they just need.
Well, we would say under the way we've crafted it and changed it, it would not apply, that they would not be able to see those students and apply them towards their hours and get supervision from an LEP.
Right. No, I think I got it. I think I got it now.
So
he's doing some research.
I would say 90+% of what we do is ERMS related. So I think when we had this conversation, that frankly there was an interest in having it be more broad, and I think it was a compromise to make people feel perhaps
so can you give me an example of a non-ERMS activity?
Sure. For example, under a multi-tiered system of support, under that model, where all students, we want to keep them from perhaps getting into special ed or reaching more of it may be that a school psychologist or an LEP is seeing a student who's not on an IEP.
Okay, so then here's my thought, because then I'm thinking for LPCs, school counselors, if they want to do, okay, let me reframe this. School counseling in the majority of the country outside of California, a large portion of their job is prevention. So those to prevent kids to get into ERMs.
And I should defer to Chris and some of the folks that are really, really involved in this, but my experience is that most of those services in California are provided by school counselors, not necessarily school psychologists.
Right, but most schools don't have school counselors in this state. We've got the worst ratios in the entire country.
That's true. So I think the point is that school psychologists do, in fact, intervene at that level. It's not a majority of their practice. It's not a significant part of what we do.
Right, because the people in ERMs are more urgent, and there's not enough space and time.
And ERMs specifically is a different funding stream.
Yeah.
So you can't see a student who's not on an IEP under an ERMS umbrella.
Right.
But under our scope of practice, we certainly could.
So I guess my thought was, I don't want to prevent counselors from being able to provide prevention services, assuming there's funding to allow them to do that. I just didn't want them to be in a private practice with an LEP not tied to a school.
They could.
That's what I was trying to narrow it down to. I want them to be in an educational setting or connected to the educational setting.
And that connection was the ERMS piece.
Right.
Right.
So if we said and other services, then you could have an LEP who has a private practice and then an APCC underneath that person, and they're just doing work with children.
As long as it's under the LEP scope, yes.
Under the LEP scope, because that would be, wow.
Or you could have a APCC, AMFT, ASW who's not doing services connected to any school, but
Right.
providing mental health services, seeking out an LEP for supervision, and that's also what we wanted to avoid.
And so that was the response to that.
Exactly. But to your point, most school districts have wellness centers that are staffed either by associates or licensed staff that are employees of the school district, or those services have been contracted out to community-based organizations that provide that same service. So we're talking about two different activities.
Yeah.
There is a support for those students through the wellness center activities, through the community-based organizations or other services that are provided by the school district, and they can be supervised by their agency or through another supervision line.
Sure.
The key was to do what Betty has already stated several times, was to limit LEP supervision to the provision of ERMS and ERMS only.
Yeah, because I wouldn't want an LEP supervising an APCC in private practice seeing 40-year-olds.
Right. Exactly. And that's what
So-
we're trying to avoid.
And so the removal of the term "and other services" prevents that.
But it also prevents them from doing other work in the schools for prevention. They can't run a program like a group therapy program for students who aren't in ERMS. Oh.
But I think, Leah, I think what we need to recognize, and I'm open to be corrected, is that LEPs specialize in doing the testing piece for the ERMS referrals. No one else can do that but them. And so a bulk of their work is that, and while they do other things, as I've heard, they do testing. I mean, and an anybody else can't. No, I'm not saying that's the only thing you do, but you're the only ones who can. I can't do it. Gabriel can't do it. The LEPs do. So I think we need to hold that piece too.
So I just wanted to add one more thing. I'm sorry I've got you all discombobulated here, but you did ask for input. So I refer you to Title 34 of the CFR, the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 300, Paragraph 14, and there's a definition of school social work services. It's pretty brief. I'll read it to you quickly. Preparing a social or developmental history on a child with disability, group and individual counseling with the child and the family, working in partnership with parents and others on those problems in a child's living situation, home, school, and community that affects the child's adjustment in school, mobilizing school and community resources to enable the child to learn as effectively as possible in his or her educational program, and assisting in developing positive behavioral intervention strategies, which is similar to prevention. So these are the services. If you think that these are all in ERMS, then we're good.
Mm-hmm.
But
I do.
If you think that some of them could be or could not be, then I have a problem.
No, I think the first part of your sentence said it right there, when it said addressing students with disabilities to allow. As soon as you said that, by definition, you're talking about students who are on an IEP, who therefore those services would be tied to ERMS. So that's absolutely included. Chris, did you want to?
Real quickly, a clarification for Mr. Maddox. The school psychologist is responsible for assessing a student to determine whether or not they're eligible for special education services. Within that practice, that decision is an IEP team decision. The school psych doesn't always make it, they should never make it themselves, right? That's not how it works. But for the ERMS services, that's a related service. So that goes beyond eligibility. Once the eligibility has been determined, then do you need the ERMS services? That, unless it's done initially with an initial student coming into special education, is an additional assessment. And oftentimes, the school psychologist is not the person that's doing that assessment. That assessment is done by the ERMS department, whoever's running it, whether it be an MFT, an LEP, or whoever. So that scope just moves past that.
For clarifying that, there's no eligibility for ERMS. You're eligible for special ed, and then do you need the related services? So let's move back. I think we're back to the language, Roseanne. I think
Okay.
we have consensus.
So moving forward, we're going to, looking at 4980.03G, we're going to strike "and other services," and then in 4980.43C9, we're going to change providing educationally related mental health services. That sentence, we're going to strike the rest of that sentence and say, as defined in subdivision G of 4980.03. We're going to make those same changes for the other two license types.
Right, which was the original motion. So I don't think we have a change. I think we're ready to go. So unless there is further comment from the public, I think I would like to call for a vote.
It's
And
support if amended with those changes.
The vote is you want to repeat your motion, Leah, please?
To support if, amended with those minor changes in those two sections for all three professions.
Yep.
So, Christina?
And make other non-substantive changes as necessary.
Thank you very much. And that was seconded by Christina.
No, it was
it's
Peter.
Peter. Oh, it's seconded by Peter. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have what you need, Christina?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Gabriel Knapp?
Aye.
Allison?
Yes.
Dr. Christine Willis?
Yes.
Max Disposal?
Yes.
Betty Conley?
Yes.
Dr. Peter Chu?
Aye.
Jonathan Maddox?
No.
Christina Wong?
Yes.
Dr. Leah Brewer?
Yes.
Motion carried.
So, after that extensive discussion, I'm going to propose that we break for lunch. Do I is that a heave of approval? Okay. Thank you. And so we are right around 12:15. Let's try and be back around 1:15. I think there's a lot of places to eat around.